twilight of the late 9th century descends upon the rolling hills of Wessex with a heavy, deliberate slowness. Over the vast, sprawling landscapes of southern England, the transition from late autumn to early winter is marked by a deep, resonant silence that seems to rise directly from the damp, dark earth. The ancient forests of oak and beech, which have stood as silent witnesses to the passage of countless generations, now stand bare, their dark branches silhouetted against a pale amber sky. The crisp air carries the faint, clean scent of frost and the distant, earthy aroma of wood smoke drifting from small, scattered settlements nestled in the valleys. As the sun dips beneath the western horizon, the vibrant colours of the daytime world gently fade away, replaced by a monochrome tapestry of deep greys, soft charcoals, and the pure, pale white of the oncoming frost. It is an era of profound transition, where the natural world dictates the rhythm of human existence, and the shifting of the seasons governs the thoughts and movements of all men. In the heart of this ancient kingdom, within the royal settlement of Winchester, the royal residence stands as a fortress of quiet contemplation. The massive timber walls and sturdy stone foundations of the palace hall are built to withstand both the elements and the tumultuous uncertainties of an age defined by upheaval. Yet on this particular evening, the external world seems to recede into insignificance, leaving only the vast, quiet space of the interior chambers. Inside the great hall, the air is cool and still, holding a collective breath as the remnants of daylight retreat through the narrow, high-set windows. The stone floors, worn smooth by the passage of many feet, catch the final horizontal rays of the setting sun, casting long, dramatic shadows that stretch across the room like silent tapestries of the past. There is a profound sense of isolation here, an isolation born not of loneliness, but of the immense responsibility that rests upon the shoulders of the man who sits quietly within these walls. King Alfred, the sovereign of this vulnerable yet resilient realm, remains seated at his heavy oak writing table, his eyes watching the gradual fading of the light. He is a ruler whose mind is constantly active, perpetually seeking pathways towards stability, wisdom, and spiritual renewal for his people. The burdens of governance are vast, encompassing the defense of borders, the administration of justice, and the preservation of a cultural heritage that feels dangerously fragile in a fractured world. As the darkness deepens, the physical boundaries of his kingdom seem to contract to the immediate space around him, a small sanctuary of intellect and devotion in the midst of an uncertain wilderness. The great challenges of his reign are not merely physical, they are intellectual and spiritual. He understands that to rebuild a society, one must first cultivate the mind, establishing an internal order that can withstand any external storm. The silence of the room is absolute, broken only by the soft rhythmic rustle of the wind, brushing against the heavy woolen drapes that cover the doorways. The king moves his hand slowly across the surface of the empty table, feeling the deep, natural grain of the wood, a tactile reminder of the enduring strength of the land he rules. Outside, the stars begin to appear one by one, piercing the deep velvet of the night sky with a cold, pristine brilliance. These celestial bodies move along their ancient, predetermined paths, completely indifferent to the struggles of kings and kingdoms below. They represent a perfect, unyielding order, an eternal clockwork that operates far beyond the reach of human hands. For Alfred, looking out into the gathering darkness, the stars are both a source of profound comfort and a reminder of the chaotic, unmeasured nature of the human world below, where time slip away unnoticed, uncaptured, and uncontrolled. As the last vestige of twilight disappears, the room is plunged into a profound, velvety dark. The external world has completely vanished from view, leaving only the cold air and the heavy presence of the night. It is in these quiet, unrecorded moments, far removed from the clamour of the court and the demands of diplomacy, that the true essence of leadership is forged. The king sits in the stillness, his breathing slow and even, allowing the quietude of the evening to wash over him. The night is long, stretching out before him like an uncharted ocean, a space of potential insight and deep reflection. The journey into the heart of order begins here in the absolute quiet of a Wessex winter night, where the search for a steady light is about to transform the way an entire nation perceives the passage of existence. The Royal Hall of Winchester, constructed from massive timbers of ancient Wessex oaks and reinforced with thick blocks of grey limestone, enters its nightly state of repose. As the darkness thickens, the architectural details of this great structure begin to soften, melting into the deep shadows that pool in the high vaulted ceilings. The heavy timber beams, hand-hewn by master carpenters decades ago, crisscross overhead like the protective canopy of a dense forest. Each beam bears the subtle marks of the adze and the broadaxe, silent testaments to human labour that are now illuminated only by the faint, residual luminescence filtering down from the high clerestory openings. The air within this vast space carries a distinct, comforting stillness, a microclimate sheltered from the restless weather of the southern downs. It smells faintly of aged timber, dried moss used for insulation, and the clean mineral scent of cold stone that has absorbed the coolness of the earth below. As the daylight surrenders completely, the physical dimensions of the hall seem to alter. The distant corners of the room recede into an infinite blackness, making the central space feel like an island of security within an uncharted sea of night. The heavy tapestries hung along the stone walls, woven with thick woolen threads of madder red, woad blue and weld yellow, lose their vibrant hues in the dimming light. The grand depictions of ancestral lineages and ancient Christian symbols fade into muted textures, their intricate patterns readable only through the memory of those who look upon them by day. The long trestle tables where the king's councillors and the royal hearth troops gather during the daylight hours to deliberate and dine now stand empty and polished, reflecting the dark, glossy sheen of natural oils and beeswax rubbed deep into their grains over many winters. There is an inherent poetry in this total absence of activity. The bustling sounds of the royal court, the clinking of iron keys, the low murmur of scribes checking inventories, the soft shuffling of leather shoes across the floor, and the crackle of the great central hearth have all dissipated into the quiet fabric of the evening. The fire in the centre of the hall has been safely covered with ash for the night, reduced to a dormant, glowing heart that emits no flickering glare, only a steady, ambient warmth that rises slowly toward the rafters. This dim, warm atmosphere creates a sense of profound sanctuary. The walls do not feel oppressive, rather they act as a grand protective shell, insulating the thoughts of the monarch from the vast, untamed wilderness that surrounds the royal villa. The king remains still, adapting his vision to the subtle gradations of the darkness. In this quietude, the sensory world becomes heightened. The ears pick up the micro-sounds of the structure itself, the faint, occasional groan of the massive roof timbers adjusting to the dropping temperature outside, and the soft, musical sigh of the wind as it brushes past the thick shuttered windows. These small sounds do not disrupt the silence. Instead, they emphasize it, underlining the security and isolation of the palace. The cold air outside attempts to find entry through the narrowest of gaps, but the craftsmanship of the royal builders ensures that the interior remains a place of calm, unruffled stability. In this shadowy landscape, the passage of time becomes entirely abstract. Without the sun marking its path across the floorboards, and without the shadows shifting predictably along the walls, the current moment seems to expand, losing its connection to a structured sequence. For a ruler who values precision, justice, and spiritual diligence, this formless dark represents both a space for deep, uninterrupted thought and a silent challenge. The night is a vast territory that needs to be governed just as carefully as the physical lands of Wessex. As Alfred sits in the near-total obscurity of his chamber, the architecture of the hall stands around him like an empty vessel, waiting for a reliable source of light to define its space and give a reliable shape to the long hours of the dark. Within the profound stillness of the Winchester Palace, King Alfred's mind grapples with an enemy far more elusive than any invading army. While the borders of Wessex are constantly threatened by physical forces, it is the invisible, chaotic slippage of time that weighs heavily on the king's thoughts during these long winter months. In the deep winter of the northern latitudes, the days contract into brief, pale intervals of light, while the nights expand into vast, seemingly endless expanses of dark. Without a reliable method to measure these hours, the day becomes fragmented and unpredictable. The clouds that perpetually roll in from the western sea frequently obscure the sun, leaving the daytime world without a sundial's guiding shadow, while the thick overcast of the winter nights hides the familiar, turning patterns of the stars. Time becomes a fugitive element, unseen, unmeasured, and entirely wild. For a monarch dedicated to the restoration of law, education, and spiritual discipline, this lack of structure is a profound obstacle. Alfred views his life not as a personal possession, but as a sacred trust that must be balanced meticulously between his duties to the state and his devotion to the divine. He deeply desires to divide his days with absolute equity, allocating equal portions to the administration of justice, the translation of illuminating texts, physical rest, and the sacred rhythm of monastic prayers. Yet, in the dimness of the winter palace, the hours dissolve into one another without distinction. The morning merges imperceptibly into the afternoon, and the night drags on without an internal boundary to signal when the world should wake, when the king should write, or when the clergy should lift their voices in praise. This temporal chaos feels like a slow unraveling of the cosmic order he is trying so hard to build. The frustration is felt most acutely during the dark hours of the evening, when the king wishes to dedicate his remaining energy to his scholarly pursuits. In this era, knowledge is a precious flame that must be carefully tended, and Alfred believes that a kingdom without wisdom cannot long endure. He sits before his parchment, wanting to lose himself in the profound philosophies of ancient texts, yet he is constantly interrupted by the nagging uncertainty of the hour. Has he spent too long on a single chapter? Is it time to change the palace guard? Have the monks in the nearby minster already passed the hour of matins in the dark? The lack of a reliable anchor in time creates a subtle, perpetual anxiety, a sense that the precious capital of human life is being squandered simply because there is no scales on which to weigh its passage. As the wind continues to whisper through the eaves of the stone hall, the king realizes that to conquer the chaos of his outer world, he must first introduce a systematic order to his inner world. The measurement of time is not merely a convenience for the court, it is a foundational act of civilization. It transforms the raw, unpredictable flow of nature into a structured canvas upon which human intellect, law, and spirituality can be intentionally painted. To hold time steady is to reclaim a piece of the divine harmony that the Creator established in the heavens. Alfred looks into the dense obscurity of his chamber, his determination hardening in the quiet. He knows he must find a way to tame this invisible current, to make the hours visible, and to create an unwavering guide that can cut through the deepest gloom of the Wessex winter. The channel is a storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of relaxation and peaceful sleep. The pursuit of knowledge within the early medieval world requires a quiet, almost monastic determination, a quality that King Alfred possesses in boundless measure. For him, the survival of Wessex depends not just on the strength of its shield walls, but on the preservation of its intellect and literacy. He looks upon the ancient manuscripts that have survived the fires of past raids with a sense of reverent awe. These precious volumes, written in the formal, elegant Latin of the Western Church, contain the accumulated wisdom of centuries, theology, history, philosophy, and law. Yet, they remain locked away from the vast majority of his people, hidden behind the barrier of a language that few can comprehend. The king's greatest, most enduring ambition is to unlock these treasures, translating the most essential books into the native Anglo-Saxon tongue, so that knowledge might flow freely through the valleys and towns of his land. In the quiet sanctuary of his private quarters, the writing table is arranged with the specialized tools of the scribe's craft. Sheets of fine vellum, carefully prepared from dried animal skins and scraped to a smooth velvety finish, lie waiting in the dimness. There are small horn vessels containing dark, rich inks made from oak galls and iron salts, which give off a faint, sharp scent of the deep forest. A collection of goose quills, their tips precisely slit and hardened by heat, sit in a small wooden tray, ready to translate the thoughts of the monarch onto the enduring page. To Alfred, the act of translation is a deeply spiritual labor. It requires absolute concentration, a peaceful environment, and above all, an unhurried, steady span of time where the mind can immerse itself in the nuances of a complex sentence, turning classical phrases into the rhythmic, poetic prose of his ancestors. Yet, this intellectual labour is constantly fragmented by the irregular environment of the 9th century palace. The mind requires a predictable rhythm to achieve deep contemplation, but the flickering, unmeasured nights offer no such stability. As the king holds a quill above the blank vellum, his thoughts often wander to the precarious state of learning across England. Monasteries that were once great centres of illumination have fallen silent, their scriptoriums empty, their libraries scattered to the winds. To rebuild this broken cultural landscape, Alfred knows he must establish a new standard of order within his own household. The restoration of literacy cannot be a hurried, erratic endeavour. It must be a systematic, reliable process that moves forward step by step, hour by hour, through the dedication of long, illuminated nights. As he looks down at the faint, ghostly outlines of the unwritten pages before him, the king visualizes the future scriptoriums he hopes to establish across his realm. He imagines rows of quiet scribes, their quills moving in perfect harmony, capturing the light of old wisdom and projecting it forward into generations yet unborn. This vision of an educated, literate Wessex is what drives him to persist through the cold and the dark. But to turn this vision into reality, he requires more than just ink and parchment. He needs a reliable companion for his nocturnal work, a physical manifestation of order that can stand beside him at the writing table, measuring his progress and holding back the chaotic tide of the unilluminated night. The physical reality of a 9th century stone palace is an environment of constant negotiation with the natural world. While the thick limestone walls of the Winchester residence provide a sturdy defence against the harsh elements of the Wessex winter, they are not entirely impervious to the persistent, biting winds that sweep across the open downs. Over decades of changing seasons, the frost has worked its way into the smallest crevices of the masonry, creating microscopic fissures and slight shifts in the mortar. Through these hidden channels, the cold air of the outside world forces its way inside, moving through the great hall in silent, invisible currents. These internal drafts are restless and erratic, shifting their direction with every sudden gust that rattles the heavy wooden shutters outside, ensuring that the air within the palace remains in a state of subtle, perpetual motion. In the king's private chamber, these wild air currents present a constant challenge to the comfort and stability of indoor life. The heavy woolen drapes hung over the doorways sway gently, their fringed edges brushing against the floor with a soft, rhythmic whisper that sounds like the passing of unseen spirits. The heat generated by the braziers is quickly dispersed by these restless drafts, creating pockets of warmth that dissolve into chill air just a few feet away. For anyone attempting to work by candlelight, the drafts are a source of endless disruption. The invisible currents catch the exposed flames of the standard illumination, causing them to dance wildly, casting long, erratic shadows across the stone walls and making the text on the vellum table appear to move and jump in the unsteady glare. The wind behaves like an uninvited guest, whistling softly through the narrow gaps in the window frames and swirling across the surface of the writing table. It carries with it the raw, cold scent of the frozen earth and the dampness of the winter sky, reminding the inhabitants of the palace of the untamed wilderness just beyond the stone perimeter. For the king, trying to maintain a focused mind in this environment requires a great deal of internal discipline. The constant movement of the air keeps the room in a state of atmospheric flux, making it difficult to establish that deep, unruffled tranquility that is so necessary for scholarly translation and spiritual meditation. Every sudden draught that enters the room threatens to upset the delicate equilibrium of his work, scattering loose pieces of parchment or cooling the ink too quickly in its horn well. Moreover, these persistent drafts have a devastating effect on the simple tools used to measure the passing hours. The open candles, which should serve as a steady baseline for the evening's routine, are entirely at the mercy of these capricious air currents. A sudden breeze from an unseen wall fissure can cause a flame to flare up, melting a deep channel down one side of the wax and destroying any semblance of a uniform burn. In this way, the unstable architecture of the palace directly contributes to the breakdown of temporal order, allowing the wildness of the winter weather to dictate the internal rhythm of the royal household. Alfred watches the air currents manipulate the darkness of his room, recognizing that if he is to achieve the precise, structured life he desires, he must find a way to conquer these internal winds, creating a micro-sanctuary where a flame can burn with perfect, unbothered serenity. In his early attempts to bring structure to the long winter nights, King Alfred turned to the most common tool of illumination available to the wealthy and the devout, the standard beeswax candle. Crafted from the finest purified wax gathered from the royal apiaries in the dense woodlands of Wessex, these candles were a luxury, burning with a sweet, honeyed fragrance that was vastly superior to the acrid, smoky odour of common tallow rushes. The king's scribes had carefully calculated the weight and height of these premium tapers, believing that in a room free from obvious movement, a specific length of wax would consume itself in a predictable uniform span of time. They had gone so far as to draw faint horizontal lines across the surface of the wax, hoping these markings would serve as a visual clock to guide the king's nighttime schedule. However, the reality of the drafty stone palace quickly shattered these optimistic calculations. As the king sat at his desk watching the marked candle burn, the invisible currents of air moving through the chamber wreaked havoc on the experiment. When a stray draught caught the exposed flame, it would tilt the white-hot wick to one side. Instead of a smooth, horizontal pool of liquid wax forming at the top of the candle, the intense heat would breach the outer rim, creating a sudden, rapid channel down the side of the taper. The molten wax would spill outward in a heavy, wasteful tear, cascading down the length of the candle and hardening into irregular, ghostly ridges on the wooden holder below. This uneven melting process meant that the candle burned down at an erratic and entirely unpredictable speed. A single hour's mark might be reached in half the allotted time if a persistent draft kept the flame flaring, while another segment might last far longer if the air briefly grew still. The lines painted by the scribes became meaningless, distorted by the melting wax that obscured them or consumed too quickly by a sudden aggressive burst of combustion. Instead of providing a sense of calm and order, the open candle became a source of constant distraction, its flame jumping, guttering, and producing thin wisps of dark smoke that drifted lazily toward the ceiling. The king could never be certain if the passing of a mark represented an hour, 40 minutes, or a mere fraction of a true interval. The unreliability of this system underscored the profound difficulty of establishing precision in an imprecise world. To rely on an open flame in a draughty hall was to build a house upon shifting sand. Alfred looked at the ruined, misshapen lump of wax on his table, realizing that the standard candle in its raw form was inadequate for the high spiritual and administrative demands of his reign. The problem was not the quality of the wax or the accuracy of the markings, but the vulnerability of the flame itself to the external environment. To solve the riddle of time, the king understood that he could not change the nature of the wind, nor could he easily seal every stone crack in his palace. Instead, he had to find a way to isolate the flame, creating a protective barrier that would allow the wax to melt with an absolute unvarying rhythm. All stories presented on this channel are global historical tales, gently curated and narrated based on themes such as the rise and fall of nations, human cultures, and extraordinary journeys through time. The inability to accurately measure the passage of the night creates a subtle but profound ripples of disorder that extends far beyond the walls of the king's private chamber. In the early medieval world, life is ideally governed by the liturgical calendar and the canonical hours, a sacred division of the day and night into specific intervals of prayer, work, and contemplation. For the monasteries of Wessex, such as the Old Minster in Winchester, the night is not a time of uninterrupted sleep, but a period of heightened spiritual vigilance. The monks are bound by holy vow to rise for matins in the deep dark, followed by lauds as the first pale light of dawn breaks over the eastern horizon. These prayers are viewed as a vital spiritual shield, protecting the kingdom from visible and invisible perils. Yet, without a reliable mechanism to gauge the passing hours during overcast winter nights, the religious houses are forced to rely on guesswork or the erratic burning of unchecked candles. Frequently, the monastery bell rings too early, summoning the weary brothers from their straw pallets into the freezing chapel before the true midnight hour has arrived. At other times, the community sleeps past the designated time, missing the profound stillness of the late-night vigil entirely. This temporal misalignment is a source of deep distress for Alfred, who views the spiritual health of his realm as inextricably linked to its military and economic survival. If the prayers of the church are chaotic and disordered, he fears that the divine favour keeping the kingdom intact might be compromised. The administrative functions of the royal court suffer from the same lack of temporal cohesion. Important councils with ealdormen and lieges, who travel from distant shires to seek the king's judgment, are subject to the whim of an unpredictable sun. When the winter clouds obscure the sky for days on end, the scheduling of legal trials and diplomatic receptions becomes a matter of intuition rather than precision. Decisions that require careful, extended deliberation are either rushed as the darkness catches the court by surprise, or delayed indefinitely while waiting for a clear sky. This erratic pacing breeds inefficiency and frustration among the nobility, who look to the crown to provide an example of absolute stability, clarity, and unyielding order in a world that already feels chaotic. For the king himself, the disruption of the hours is a constant impediment to his personal vow of balanced living. His desire to spend half of his days and nights in scholarly devotion and administrative service is thwarted by the fluidity of the unmeasured dark. He finds his translation work cut short by the sudden realize that dawn is already breaking, or conversely, he finds himself waiting in unproductive darkness for hours that seem to stretch out indefinitely. The lack of synchronization between his internal intent and the external world creates a lingering sense of incompletion. Alfred understands that a unified kingdom requires a unified clock, a shared, reliable rhythm that can bind the palace, the monastery, and the common people together in a harmonious and predictable dance of daily existence. The dark hours deepen and the deep, silent midnight settles heavily over the old stone palace of Winchester. In his private chamber, King Alfred sits entirely alone, the failed candle having guttered out into a cold, misshapen pool of hardened wax. The absence of light brings with it a profound sense of physical and spiritual isolation. In this absolute obscurity, the immediate concerns of the daytime world fade into the background, leaving the monarch to face the immense, intangible burdens of his office. He can hear his own slow, deliberate breathing in the dark, a small sound that emphasizes the vast, empty space around him. The crown he wears by day is a symbol of authority and strength, but by night it transforms into a heavy mantle of responsibility that presses down upon his thoughts, demanding a clarity of vision that is difficult to sustain in a world obscured by shadow. In the stillness of this unmeasured hour, Alfred's mind travels across the borders of his fragmented kingdom. He contemplates the vast expanses of Wessex, the isolated farmsteads, the fortified burghs he has worked so hard to construct, the ancient monasteries where learning has languished, and the quiet rivers that snake through the landscape toward a vulnerable coastline. Every corner of his realm is subject to the unpredictable whims of a turbulent era, where peace is a fragile commodity and stability must be defended with constant vigilance. The dark night seems to mirror the state of his country, a territory where the landmarks of civilization have been obscured and where the path forward must be navigated through sheer force of will. Without a reliable anchor to measure the passing hours, the night feels like an unmapped wilderness, an uncharted sea where a ruler can easily lose his bearings. The lack of a dependable timekeeper becomes a symbol for the greater challenges facing his people. Alfred recognizes that a society cannot truly flourish when it exists in a state of perpetual temporal uncertainty. If a king cannot measure the hours of his own evening, how can he hope to establish an enduring framework of law, education, and spiritual discipline across an entire nation? True governance requires precision. It demands that every resource, including the precious, finite resource of time, be managed with wisdom and intent. The current formless dark represents a lingering pocket of chaos within his own household, a reminder that despite his military victories and administrative reforms, there are still fundamental elements of existence that remain wild and untamed. As the wind continues to rattle the oak shutters, bringing the distant, muffled sound of the city guards calling out to one another, the king's thoughts turn inward. He analyzes his own limitations, his physical frailties, and the brief span of years allotted to a mortal man to accomplish his earthly mission. The hours are slipping away in the darkness, unrecorded and unused, like water vanishing into the dry sand of the downs. This realization does not induce despair. Rather, it ignites a quiet, burning determination within his mind. He cannot allow the darkness to dictate the boundaries of his life. He must find a mechanism to master the night, to carve out a space of absolute certainty within the shifting shadows of his palace. Sitting in the complete quiet of the Winchester midnight, Alfred reaches a profound philosophical conclusion. To rebuild a kingdom, one must begin with the smallest, most foundational blocks of order. The defence of Wessex begins not on the battlefield, but at the writing table, in the deliberate, structured cultivation of wisdom. And that cultivation requires a reliable companion, a tool that can stand beside him in the deep winter, capturing the fleeting hours and transforming the formless night into a structured canvas of purpose. With this clear objective crystallizing in his mind, the king prepares to look beyond the failures of the past, ready to seek out the practical mechanics that will allow him to harness the light and give a predictable, comforting shape to the long hours of the dark. The morning that follows the long, unmeasured night arrives with a thin silver light that slowly creeps across the stone floors of the royal apartment. King Alfred, having spent the dark hours in deep contemplation, rises with a renewed clarity of purpose. His reflections have led him to a fundamental philosophical realization. The true restoration of his kingdom depends upon a foundation of predictable, structured time. He sees that without a shared, reliable clock, the laws he codifies, the schools he establishes, and the religious devotions he champions will remain scattered and uncoordinated. Order cannot be imposed by royal decree alone. It must be woven into the very fabric of daily life, measured by an unyielding standard that applies equally to the king in his palace, the monk in his cell, and the labourer in the field. Alfred walks to the window, pushing back the heavy wooden shutter to breathe in the crisp, cold air of the morning. Below him, the royal villa of Winchester is beginning to stir, its inhabitants moving through the mist like figures in a half-remembered dream. He watches the slow, orderly awakening of his household, recognizing that human society naturally craves structure. The seasonal migrations of birds, the turning of the tides along the southern coast, and the growth of crops all follow an inherent, divine geometry. It is only humanity that has allowed its daily existence to become detached from this cosmic harmony, drifting into an erratic rhythm dictated by the unpredictability of the weather and the shifting availability of natural light. To reclaim the hours is to realign human endeavour with the grand design of the Creator. The king's mind, always analytical, begins to discard the inadequate methods of the past. Sundials are beautifully precise, but they are entirely dependent on a clear sky, rendering them useless during the heavy overcast of a British winter and completely blind during the long hours of the night. Water clocks, which drop liquid through a narrow aperture, are prone to freezing in the unheated chambers of the palace, their mechanisms seized by the frost that thickens the water into solid ice. The solution must be something independent of the sky and resilient against the bitter cold. It must be an instrument that generates its own consistent progress, consuming a steady material at an unvarying pace, unaffected by the drop in temperature or the absence of the sun. As he turns back to his empty writing table, the image of the candle returns to his thoughts. The concept itself is elegant, a linear progression of fuel consumed by a single steady spark. The failure of his previous attempt was not an error in the concept, but a failure of protection. The environment had been allowed to interfere with the experiment, injecting its own wildness into the delicate balance of the burning wax. To seek the mechanics of order, therefore, means to invent a system of isolation. The flame must be housed within a sanctuary of its own, a miniature fortress that can deflect the stray air currents of the hall while still allowing the light to perform its vital function. With this design taking shape in his mind, Alfred prepares to mobilize the intellectual and practical resources of his court. He understands that a king does not work in isolation. True leadership lies in directing the specialized talents of his people toward a singular, noble objective. The creation of a reliable timekeeper will be a collaborative triumph of 9th century engineering, uniting the theoretical geometry of the scholar with the practical dexterity of the artisan. The journey toward a structured life is about to move from the realm of philosophical desire into the physical world of metal, wood, and bone. As the palace prepares to construct an unprecedented shield for the fugitive hours of the night. The great council chamber of Winchester Palace, usually reserved for discussions of defence and land tenancy, transforms into a workshop of quiet intellect. King Alfred has summoned the most skilled minds and deftest hands in his realm. Master metalworkers who understand the tempering of bronze, woodcarvers who have spent lifetimes shaping the stubborn native oak, and seasoned apiarists who manage the royal bee vessels in the sheltered combes of the Sussex Downs. The atmosphere is thick with expectation, the low murmur of voices reflecting the unusual nature of the meeting. These men are accustomed to creating weapons of iron or practical tools of agriculture, yet today they have been called by their sovereign to forge something entirely intangible, an instrument to capture and hold the passing hours. The king sits at the head of the long oak table, his presence commanding yet deeply accessible. He speaks to his craftsmen not with the harsh tone of an absolute ruler, but with the shared language of design and problem-solving. He explains the profound difficulties of the winter nights, how the invisible drafts through the stone masonry cause the open candles to gutter, melt irregularly, and destroy the horizontal hour markings painted by the scribes. He describes his vision of a systematic life where time is measured with absolute equity and predictability, unbothered by the storms that rage outside the shutters. The artisans listen in silent reverence, their expressions shifting from initial curiosity to deep concentration as they begin to visualize the mechanical parameters of the king's request. One by one, the craftsmen present their perspectives, highlighting the unique properties and limitations of the materials at their disposal. The woodcarver displays a piece of cured heartwood, explaining how it can be split into incredibly thin, lightweight slats to form a protective frame, yet warning that raw timber alone might warp under the persistent heat of a close flame. The bronze smith demonstrates the strength of hammered metal, showing how it can be pierced with intricate patterns to allow air to pass, while noting that too much metal might completely block the essential light that the king needs for his late-night translation work. The conversation moves forward with a slow, deliberate pace, each point weighed and considered by the monarch with the same analytical care he applies to the codification of his laws. As the morning progresses, the collaborative nature of the project becomes clear. The solution cannot rely on a single discipline. It must be a synthesis of multiple crafts working in perfect alignment. The apiarists must provide wax of an unprecedented purity and uniform density. The scribes must determine the exact mathematical spacing for the temporal markings, and the engineers must construct a protective housing that balances the opposing needs of ventilation and containment. There is a tangible sense of excitement in the room, a quiet pride among the artisans who realize that their manual dexterity is being raised to serve a grand philosophical and spiritual purpose for the entire kingdom. Alfred watches his craftsmen converse, his heart gladdened by the scene of collective intellect. This meeting exemplifies the cultural revival he wishes to plant across the soil of Wessex, a society where practical skill and higher learning are no longer separated, but bound together in the pursuit of order, beauty, and truth. As the council draws to a close, specific tasks are assigned, and the artisans depart the hall with clear directions. The great experiment has begun, and the individual workshops of Winchester are about to set to work, preparing the raw elements of nature to be assembled into a groundbreaking shield for the vulnerable light of the night. The first essential component brought before the royal court is the raw, pure fuel destined to carry the king's light, forest beeswax of the highest quality, gathered by the royal apiarists from wild hives hidden deep within the ancient protected woodlands of Hampshire. and the Sussex Downs. This wax is fundamentally different from the coarse, greasy animal tallow used in the dwellings of the common folk. Tallow rushes burn with a sputtering, unpredictable flame, throwing off a thick, acrid black smoke that coats walls in soot and stings the eyes of the reader. Pure beeswax, by contrast, is a substance of remarkable cleanliness and docility. It represents the concentrated essence of summer fields, collected by thousands of bees moving meticulously through clover, heather, and wild thyme, distilled over months into an organic matter that holds a unique, enduring stability. When the heavy wooden crates are opened in the palace scriptorium, the air is immediately filled with a rich, comforting fragrance. It is a complex olfactory tapestry, a deep, sweet aroma of honey mingled with the clean green scent of forest moss, dried meadow grass, and the subtle, sharp undertone of propolis, the natural resin used by bees to seal their hives. The raw blocks of wax, having been gently melted and filtered through fine linen cloths multiple times by the apiarists to remove every trace of pollen, dust, and organic debris, present a beautiful, uniform appearance. In the cool light of the scriptorium windows, they display a soft, matte texture and a rich, pale golden hue, reminiscent of the low sun setting over the autumn fields. The physical properties of this purified wax are studied closely by the king and his scholars. At room temperature, it is firm and remarkably durable, resisting the warping effects of the damp palace air, yet when held in the hand it gradually absorbs human warmth, becoming slightly yielding and smooth like polished ivory. When ignited by a spark, this high degree of purity ensures that the solid wax transitions smoothly into a crystal clear, golden liquid pool at the base of the wick. It consumes itself with an absolute minimum of residue, producing no erratic spitting or spluttering and sending up a slender, tranquil column of light that illuminates the vellum without defacing it with heavy columns of dark soot. For Alfred, looking upon these golden blocks of forest wax is a lesson in the elegant efficiency of the natural world. Here is a fuel provided entirely by the land he rules, crafted through the quiet, unceasing labour of nature, waiting to be shaped by human ingenuity into a reliable tool of governance. The absolute uniformity of the filtered wax is the vital baseline upon which the entire timekeeping experiment rests. If the density of the material varies from 1 inch to the next, the candle will burn with a shifting speed, rendering any temporal markings inaccurate. The meticulous care of the apiarists has ensured that this raw material is a perfect, flawless canvas, ready to receive the precise geometry of the scribes and hold a steady, unblinking flame through the longest winter nights. The transformation of the golden blocks of forest beeswax into a standardized instrument of time requires an extraordinary level of manual precision and patience. In the warmth of the palace undercroft, away from any sudden movements of air, the master chandlers begin the meticulous process of moulding the royal candles. To achieve an absolute uniformity of burn, the candle cannot be dipped by hand in the traditional, casual manner, which always leaves the bottom of the taper significantly thicker than the top. Instead, the craftsmen utilize a series of specially engineered bronze molds cast in 2 matching halves and polished on the inside until the metal surfaces are as smooth as still water. These molds ensure that every single candle produced is a perfect cylinder, maintaining an identical diameter of exactly 1 inch from its base to its summit. The placement of the wick is the next critical stage of the operation. The craftsmen select a cord of fine unspun flax woven with a precise number of strands to create a consistent thickness. If the wick is too thick, it will draw up too much liquid wax, causing the flame to flare aggressively and consume the fuel too quickly. If it is too thin, the flame will drown in its own melted pool and slowly suffocate. The flax cord is stretched taut down the exact center of the bronze mold, anchored tightly at both ends to ensure it does not drift to one side during the pouring process. A centered wick is paramount, for if it wanders toward the edge of the cylinder, it will melt that side prematurely, destroying the even, horizontal descent of the candle's surface. With the wick secured, the liquid wax is prepared with great care. It is heated slowly over a gentle bed of charcoal embers, never allowed to boil or scorch, which would alter its chemical density and change its burning properties. The melted wax is a luminous, transparent amber fluid flowing with the smooth consistency of fine oil. The chandler pours the liquid into the vertical moulds in a single continuous stream, using a narrow-spouted copper vessel to prevent the formation of tiny air bubbles within the core of the wax. A single air pocket hidden deep inside the candle would act as a sudden pocket of acceleration, causing the flame to drop unexpectedly and throwing off the entire measurement of the passing hours. Once poured, the moulds are left to cool slowly in the insulated warmth of the room. A rapid cooling would cause the wax to shrink unevenly or crack along the center line, ruining the absolute structural integrity required by the king. Over several hours, the fluid amber solidifies into a firm pale ivory column encasing the central flax wick in a tight, unyielding embrace. When the bronze casings are finally unclasped, the resulting candles are perfectly smooth, clean, and completely identical in weight, height, and density. They stand on the workshop table like small, silent pillars of order, ready to be delivered to the scriptorium, where their immaculate surfaces will receive the mathematical markings of the hours. If you enjoy these peaceful journeys into history, please take a soft moment to subscribe, like, and share this story with others who seek a quiet space for rest. The pristine, ivory-coloured pillars of standardised wax are carried from the chandler's undercroft up to the quiet, elevated space of the royal scriptorium. Here, the atmospheric conditions are carefully controlled, the windows are shuttered against the damp winter mist, and the room is illuminated by a soft, natural light that allows for the highest level of visual concentration. The task of transforming these beautiful cylinders of fuel into actual visual clocks falls to the royal scholars and master scribes. These men possess a deep understanding of mathematics and practical geometry, disciplines they view not merely as secular tools, but as reflections of the divine order that structures the entire universe. To mark a candle is to apply the clean, unyielding logic of numbers to the fluid, elusive canvas of time. Using fine bronze calipers and polished iron rulers, the scholars first measure the total height of the candle with absolute exactness. Every taper is designed to be precisely 12 inches in length, a dimension chosen because it allows for an elegant division into equal, manageable increments. The scribes sit at their slanted oak desks, their hands steady and their breathing regular as they use a sharp bone stylus to make minute, nearly invisible indentations along the vertical length of the wax. Each indentation is placed at a distance of exactly 1 inch from the next. Through rigorous previous experimentation conducted in isolated, draft-free containers, the scholars have determined that 1 inch of this specific density of beeswax, paired with the standardized flax wick, takes exactly 1 hour to consume itself entirely. Once the geometric points are verified by a second scholar, the scribe prepares his ink. For this delicate work, standard black ink, made from iron sulfate and crushed oak galls, is utilized. This ink is dark, rich, and highly permanent, binding closely to the slightly oily surface of the wax without bleeding or smudging. Using a very fine camel hair brush or a precise split goose quill, the scribe traces a thin, crisp horizontal line around the entire circumference of the cylinder at each marked interval. The line must be perfectly level. If it tilts even slightly, it will create visual ambiguity for the person monitoring the clock, making it difficult to determine the exact moment the hour concludes. Beside each horizontal line, the scribe meticulously paints a small, elegant Roman numeral numbering the divisions from 1 to 12. The calligraphy is executed with the same pride and artistic care reserved for the pages of sacred galls or legal codes. These numbers represent the 12 hours of the night, a sequence of stability that will guide the king through his twilight labours. As the ink dries on the pale wax, the candle undergoes a profound transformation. It is no longer just an organic source of illumination. It has become an instrument of measurement, a physical lexicon of time where every line represents a reliable step forward in the systematic organization of human life. The completed time candles are carefully placed in padded wooden chests, lined with soft linen fabric to protect the painted markings from scratching or flaking during transport. They rest in the dark like silent sentinels, waiting to be drawn forth into the king's chamber, where their painted lines will soon meet the transformative heat of the flame, turning the invisible, chaotic passage of the night into a visual, predictable descent of golden light. The moment of testing arrives on a night when the winter wind is particularly active, sweeping across the rooftops of Winchester and seeking every small opening in the stone defences of the palace. In the privacy of his personal chamber, King Alfred sits at his writing desk, ready to initiate the first true trial of the newly marked time candle. The room has been prepared as carefully as possible, with the heavy woolen drapes drawn tightly over the doorways and the solid oak shutters bolted securely against the night. One of the pristine 12-inch cylinders of wax is drawn from its protective linen wrapping and placed into a heavy bronze socket at the corner of the table. The dark lines of oak gall ink stand out with absolute clarity against the pale cream-coloured surface of the beeswax, each Roman numeral waiting to fulfill its regulatory purpose. With a small iron rod heated in the embers of the hearth, the king gently touches the tip of the exposed flax wick. A tiny, fragile spark catches, hesitates for a brief moment as it warms the surrounding wax, and then rises into a slender golden flame. Alfred watches with a sense of quiet expectation as the fire stabilizes, forming a small clear pool of liquid amber at the very top of the cylinder. For the first 20 minutes, the experiment appears to be an absolute success. The flame burns with a soft, comforting luminescence, casting a steady circle of light across the sheets of vellum and the open inkwells. The sweet, honeyed scent of the forest wax fills the immediate air, creating an atmosphere of deep tranquility that seems to push back the cold reality of the winter evening. However, the unstable environment of the ancient stone hall cannot be easily contained. As the storm intensifies outside, the pressure forces currents of cold air through the microscopic fissures in the mortar of the opposite wall. These invisible drafts travel silently across the room, dipping down from the high rafters and swirling across the surface of the writing table. Suddenly, the tranquil column of light registers the intrusion. The flame flinches, tilting sharply to the left as the moving air disrupts its vertical balance. The heat, which should be concentrated uniformly at the center of the cylinder, is pushed directly against the outer edge of the wax wall. The consequences are immediate and devastating to the geometric order of the markings. The thin, protective rim of solid wax on the drifted side melts away in a matter of moments, breaching the reservoir of liquid fuel. A heavy, molten stream of amber wax breaks through the gap, cascading rapidly down the side of the candle like a miniature glowing river. As it flows, it washes directly over the first inked line, smudging the dark oak gall mark and obscuring the Roman numeral that designates the first completed hour of the night. The candle begins to gutter wildly, its wick smoking as it fights against the turbulent current of air. Alfred watches the failure of the trial with a calm, analytical eye, refusing to allow frustration to disrupt his inner peace. Within less than 40 minutes, the candle has burned down past the level of the second hour mark on its draft side, while the sheltered side remains nearly untouched, creating a stark, sloping ruin of wax. The lines painted with such mathematical precision by the scribes have been rendered useless, consumed out of sequence by a flame made wild by its environment. The lesson is unambiguous. The standard candle, no matter how perfectly moulded or precisely marked, cannot function as a reliable clock while it remains exposed to the shifting currents of a living room. The quest for temporal order requires a deeper layer of isolation, a protective structure that can completely separate the delicate biology of the flame from the restless weather of the palace hall. Following the failure of the open-air trial, King Alfred returns to the quiet laboratory of his thoughts, entering a phase of intense creative contemplation. He recognizes that the problem before him is not one of chemistry or geometry, but of physical architecture on a miniature scale. The standardized beeswax candle is a perfect engine of time, but it is an engine without a casing, operating in an environment that is constantly trying to disrupt its delicate mechanics. To achieve the absolute precision required for his translations and his spiritual devotions, the king must find a material that can serve as a protective shield, a substance capable of deflecting the restless palace drafts while allowing the vital, illuminating quality of the flame to pass through completely unhindered. The parameters of the search are exceptionally demanding, presenting a significant riddle for the material technology of the late 9th century. The shield cannot be made of solid metal or dense wood, for while these materials would easily conquer the wind, they would plunge the king's table into absolute darkness, defeating the very purpose of the candle's existence. The material must possess a unique dual nature. It must be structurally robust enough to withstand the proximity of intense heat without warping, catching fire, or emitting foul vapors, yet it must be sufficiently translucent to transmit the soft golden light of the burning taper to the pages of vellum below. It must create a microscopic sanctuary, an isolated pocket of perfect stillness where the air pressure remains entirely uniform. Alfred sits at his desk during the grey hours of the morning, handling various samples of materials brought to him by the palace attendants. He examines pieces of fine linen cloth woven with the tightest possible thread count and soaked in translucent oils to increase their clarity. When held before a small oil lamp, the oiled cloth softens the wind, but it diffuses the light too much, turning the sharp focus needed for reading into a dull, milky glare that strains the eyes. He inspects thin slats of translucent stone, such as gypsum or mica sheets mined from the distant hills, but these mineral fragments are brittle, prone to flaking into dust when exposed to the rising heat of a candle, and their natural imperfections create distorted shadows that dance across the writing table like phantom scripts. The king's analytical mind systematically weighs and discards each option, refusing to settle for a compromise that would jeopardize the accuracy of his work. He realizes that the ideal material must be organic yet durable, flexible during the crafting process yet rigid once assembled, and capable of being polished to a degree of clarity that mimics the surface of still water. It must be a substance that can be integrated seamlessly into a lightweight framework, creating a clean, modern instrument of order that reflects the sophisticated intellect of his court. As the winter rain begins to patter softly against the exterior masonry, the king looks out toward the royal stables and the agricultural quarters of the villa, where the raw materials of rural life are processed daily. He understands that often the answers to the most profound philosophical and technical challenges are hidden within the simplest, most common elements of the natural world, waiting only for the discerning eye of the scholar and the deft hand of the artisan to reveal their true transformative potential. The search for the shield moves forward with a slow, deliberate momentum, guided by the unwavering conviction that a solution exists within the rich tapestry of his realm. In the search for a translucent shield, the modern mind might naturally turn to glass as the obvious solution to the king's dilemma. However, the material reality of the late 9th century presents an entirely different landscape of technology and craftsmanship. In Anglo-Saxon England, the art of glassmaking is an exceptionally rare, fragile, and imperfect discipline. While the ancient Romans had possessed the capability to create relatively clear window panes and sophisticated vessels, much of that specialized knowledge has slipped away into the mists of history, leaving behind a craft that struggles to produce anything beyond small decorative beads or thick, heavily colored vessels used exclusively by the wealthiest echelons of the church and nobility. The king works closely with his master glass-smiths, who bring forth the finest samples of their work for examination in the palace scriptorium. As Alfred holds a small pane of contemporary glass up to the light of the window, the limitations of the material become immediately apparent. This glass is not the crystal-clear, invisible substance of later centuries. Rather, it is thick, heavy, and shot through with a myriad of deep imperfections. Because the artisans cannot achieve the intense, uniform furnace temperatures required to completely melt the silica sand, the resulting material is filled with tiny, trapped air bubbles, dark streaks of unmelted ash, and structural ripples that distort the light like the surface of a wind-whipped pond. Furthermore, the natural iron impurities present in the local sand give the glass a pronounced deep greenish blue or muddy amber tint. When placed in front of a candle flame, this heavy coloration absorbs a significant portion of the light, dimming the illumination into a dull, subterranean glow that is entirely insufficient for the close, meticulous work of translating ancient Latin manuscripts. To read or write by such light would cause severe eye strain within less than an hour, defeating the very purpose of Alfred's intellectual mission. The glass also suffers from an inherent brittleness. A sudden, sharp change in temperature, such as the heat of a flaring candle wick contrasting with a freezing draft from a palace window, can cause the thick pane to crack unexpectedly, shattering the fragile instrument into dangerous fragments. The rarity of the material also presents a significant administrative obstacle. To equip the numerous scriptoriums, royal offices, and monasteries of Wessex with glass-enclosed timekeepers would require an expenditure of wealth and specialized labor that the kingdom simply cannot spare during an era of constant defense and reconstruction. Alfred, always a practical and efficient manager of his realm's resources, recognizes that a widespread systemic reform cannot be built upon a material that is both functionally inadequate and structurally fragile. Glass is a luxury of ornament, not a tool of utility. The search for a protective shield must look elsewhere, bypassing the expensive constraints of the furnace to find a material that is abundant, resilient, and capable of being worked with absolute precision by the native craftsmen of the land. The breakthrough that would forever alter the measurement of the night arrives not from a rare or exotic treasure, but from the most common enduring element of Anglo-Saxon agricultural life. During a quiet morning session in the royal workshop, an elderly master hornsmith, a craftsman whose entire life has been dedicated to working with the organic byproducts of the kingdom's cattle herds, steps forward to present a potential solution to his sovereign. In his rough, calloused hands, he carries a simple raw ox horn taken from a mature beast of the Wessex Downs. To the uneducated eye, the horn appears coarse, dark, and completely opaque, its exterior covered in rough, weathered ridges and stained with the grey grime of the pastoral fields. It seems an unlikely candidate to shield a royal flame. However, the artisan understands the hidden, transformative secrets locked deep within the fibrous structure of this organic material. He places the horn upon the king's table with a quiet reverence, inviting Alfred to look past its unpolished exterior. He explains that the horn is not solid bone, but a dense, tightly compressed matrix of keratin, the same resilient protein that forms the hooves of horses and the talons of hawks. When subjected to the correct combination of intense heat, moisture, and patient manual pressure, this seemingly stubborn substance undergoes a remarkable transformation. The rough outer layers can be peeled away, and the solid core can be hollowed out, leaving behind a remarkably tough, lightweight cylinder that can be split and flattened into thin, flexible panels. The most extraordinary quality of the material, the hornsmith reveals, is its latent relationship with light. While a raw horn blocks the sun completely, a sheet of horn that has been meticulously shaved down to the thickness of a fingernail and polished with fine river silt loses its density, shifting from total opacity to a beautiful clear translucency. It does not shatter like glass when subjected to a sudden impact, nor does it crack when exposed to the intense heat of a close flame. It is entirely waterproof, completely impervious to the biting palace drafts, and structurally stable enough to maintain its shape across years of continuous use. It is a material that balances the strength of iron with the weight of parchment. King Alfred listens to the presentation with a growing sense of intellectual satisfaction. He picks up the raw specimen, feeling its natural curve and the solid, reassuring weight of the organic matter. He recognizes the brilliant pragmatism of the solution. Oxhorn is a resource that exists in boundless abundance across every shire of his realm, an intrinsic part of the livestock economy that sustains his people. To transform this humble material into a sophisticated instrument of precision is a perfect manifestation of his philosophy of governance, elevating the common, everyday elements of Anglo-Saxon life through the application of wisdom, craftsmanship, and artistic intent. The order has been given. The hornsmith's workshop is to be supplied with the finest select horns from the royal herds. As the palace prepares to witness the systematic peeling back of nature's rough exterior to reveal the steady, golden light hidden within. Within the focused, quiet sanctuary of the hornsmith's workshop, the slow and methodical transformation of the raw material begins. The air in the undercroft is thick and warm, smelling deeply of damp earth, wood ash, and the sharp organic scent of heated keratin. The master artisan stands before a large iron cauldron of pure water, boiling steadily over a low bed of oak charcoal. The process cannot be rushed. The application of heat must be as gradual and uniform as the passing of the hours the finished instrument will eventually measure. The raw ox horns, selected for their straightness and clarity of grain, are submerged into the simmering water, where they will rest for hours until the fierce, stubborn structures of the bone core begin to soften and relent under the persistent influence of moisture and heat. When the horn is drawn from the cauldron steaming and pliable, the craftsman works with an efficient, rhythmic dexterity born of decades of experience. Using a specialized curved iron knife, he first splits the outer sheath along its natural seam, gently prying the softened keratin away from the hard, useless inner bone core. What remains is a hollow, flexible cone of horn, still dark and rough to the touch. To turn this three-dimensional cylinder into flat, workable panels, the artisan makes a single, precise longitudinal cut down the length of the sheath. The heated horn is then placed between heavy blocks of seasoned pear wood, which are gradually tightened by massive wooden vices, flattening the curved material into smooth, level sheets under immense, unyielding pressure. Once the sheets have cooled and hardened into their new, flat geometry, the most delicate and labor-intensive stage of the craft commences. The artisan secures a flattened sheet of horn to a smooth workbench and takes up a wide, razor-sharp draw knife. Holding his breath to ensure absolute stability, he begins to scrape the surface of the horn, moving the blade with a steady, horizontal motion that pulls away thin, translucent curls of material no thicker than a whisper. He works his way across the sheet grain by grain, continuously checking the thickness with his fingertips, feeling for the slightest micro-imperfection or uneven ridge. The goal is to reduce the stubborn horn down to an absolute uniform thinness, a fragile barrier that maintains its structural strength while surrendering its opacity to the light. As the draw knife shaves deeper into the material, the true hidden nature of the horn is revealed. The dark greys and muddy browns of the exterior give way to a beautiful clear matrix of pale amber and soft cream hues. The light from the workshop window, which previously could not penetrate the raw specimen, now begins to filter through the thin panel, casting a warm, golden glow across the artisan's calloused hands. Every stroke of the blade increases the clarity of the sheet, peeling away the visual densities of nature until the horn begins to resemble a pane of frozen river water, captured and stabilized by human skill. The final touch requires the application of fine river silt and crushed pumice stone, rubbed vigorously into the surface of the horn with a piece of soft leather. This polishing process removes the microscopic scratch marks left by the steel blade, refining the texture until it becomes as smooth and glossy as polished jewel work. The finished panels lie upon the workbench like small translucent sheets of parchment entirely impervious to the wind, resilient against the heat, and ready to be assembled into the architectural framework that will safeguard the king's steady light through the longest winter nights. The prepared horn panels, now fully refined and polished by the master artisan, are brought to the king's private chamber for a final inspection. Placed on the heavy oak writing table, they present a visual quality that is entirely unique, a delicate, ethereal texture that distinguishes them from any other material of the 9th century. They do not possess the harsh, hyper-reflective clarity of modern glass, nor the dull, greasy opacity of oiled parchment. Instead, the shaved horn sheets exhibit a beautiful, milky translucency, an organic property that handles light with an almost reverent gentleness. In the pale morning light filtering through the high casements, the panels glow with a soft, warm luster, their internal layers revealing faint, natural linear grains that resemble the delicate marbling of ancient stone. When King Alfred lifts one of the thin panels and holds it between his eyes and the window, he observes a remarkable transformation of the world beyond. The sharp, cold edges of the palace masonry and the bare branches of the distant trees are softened, viewed through a gentle filter of warm amber and pale cream tones. The material acts as an atmospheric lens, stripping away the harshness of glare while allowing the full volume of light to pass through. This specific quality is precisely what the king has been seeking for his late-night scriptorium. An open flame can cast sharp, jumping shadows that tire the eyes of a reader within an hour. But when shielded by this organic material, the light will be diffused evenly, spreading a calm, consistent radiance across the columns of text on the writing desk. The structural resilience of these thin sheets is equally comforting to the analytical monarch. He applies a firm pressure with his thumb against the center of a panel, watching it flex slightly with an elastic grace before snapping instantly back into its perfectly flat, true geometry. Unlike glass, which would crack or shatter under a similar strain, the tightly woven keratin fibers of the horn possess a natural toughness that is impervious to accidental impacts. Even when held directly over a small charcoal brazier, the material absorbs the rising heat without warping, splitting, or emitting any acrid smoke. Its surface simply becomes faintly warm to the touch, carrying a subtle, pleasant aroma of the clean forest earth. This successful synthesis of beauty and utility marks a pivotal moment in the development of the timekeeping project. The horn panels represent a perfect medium, a material that can stand directly between the wild, unpredictable environment of the drafty palace hall and the delicate, calibrated biology of the burning wax candle. They are destined to form the windows of a new kind of sanctuary, a miniature fortress of order where light and time can coexist in absolute safety. Alfred lays the polished sheet back upon his table, his mind already visualizing the completed instrument, recognizing that this humble gift of the Wessex pastures has provided the definitive answer to the riddle of the fugitive hours. With the translucent panels of shaved ox horn prepared to perfection, the task shifts to the creation of the structural skeleton that will hold them, a delicate assembly of a slender wooden and bronze framework. In the quiet atmosphere of the royal metal smithy, a master bronze worker and a royal joiner collaborate to build the housing for King Alfred's timekeeper. This miniature tower must be engineered with absolute structural integrity, designed to hold the horn sheets securely in place without allowing a single stray gap where an intrusive palace draft might slip through. Every joint must be flush, every seam tightly locked, and every material balanced so that the heat of the interior flame remains entirely harmonious with the cool air of the exterior room. The foundation of the framework is cast from pure golden bronze, chosen for its strength and its resistance to the corrosive effects of melting wax and heat. The bronzesmith pours the molten alloy into a precise clay mold, creating a heavy hexagonal base that provides a solid center of gravity for the entire instrument. This substantial base ensures that even if the writing table is accidentally jarred during a long night of translation, the delicate timekeeper will remain perfectly upright and undisturbed. In the center of this bronze plate, a small threaded socket is carved to receive the base of the standardized beeswax candle, holding the ivory pillar in a rigid, absolutely vertical alignment that prevents the wick from leaning to one side. Rising from the 6 corners of the bronze base are 6 slender vertical struts meticulously carved by the joiner from the dense heartwood of a seasoned English pear tree. Pearwood is selected for its remarkably tight, uniform grain, which allows the craftsman to cut incredibly fine channels without the wood splitting or splintering. Along the sides of each wooden strut, a microscopic groove is sliced using a razor-sharp chisel. These grooves serve as tracks into which the shaved horn panels are gently slid from the top, fitting snugly into the timber channels like the stones of a finely engineered archway. The tolerances are exceptionally close. The wood must grip the organic panels tightly enough to prevent any rattling or vibration, yet leave just enough space to accommodate the natural, minute expansion of the keratin when warmed by the candle's flame. At the top of the vertical structure, a second hexagonal rim of bronze is fitted, binding the pearwood struts together into a unified, unyielding cage. This upper crown acts as a stabilizing ring, sealing the edges of the horn panels and capping the miniature tower with a clean, architectural finish. The joiner and the smith work with a quiet, synchronized precision, using tiny bronze pins no larger than a grain of wheat to lock the timber and metal elements into a permanent embrace. There is no glue or modern adhesive used. The strength of the framework relies entirely on the ancient geometry of the mortise, the tenon, and the perfectly calibrated pin. Alfred visits the workshop as the assembly nears completion, running his fingers gently along the smooth, flush surfaces of the completed framework. He notes with satisfaction how the dark, rich tones of the polished pearwood contrast with the warm, golden gleam of the bronze fittings, creating an object that is beautiful in its utility. The framework stands on the workbench like a miniature cathedral spire, a testament to the sophisticated engineering capabilities of his court. It is a structure built to endure, a physical manifestation of order designed to enclose the volatile element of fire and provide a permanent, unshakable sanctuary for the measured hours of the night. The creation of a protective fortress for the candle presents a final, delicate paradox for the royal craftsman. A flame completely sealed away from the outside world would exhaust its oxygen within minutes, slowly suffocating in its own trapped gases and expiring long before the first hour could be measured. To live and burn with an unvarying stability, the fire must breathe. The miniature bronze and pearwood tower cannot be an airtight tomb. Rather, it must function as a carefully balanced respiratory system, allowing a constant, gentle intake of fresh air while simultaneously releasing the rising heat and invisible exhaust without creating a single turbulent draft within the internal chamber. The bronzesmith tackles this engineering challenge by focusing his efforts on the heavy base and the crown of the structure. Using an incredibly fine iron drill driven by a leather bowstring, he begins to pierce a series of microscopic ventilation apertures around the lower perimeter of the bronze foundation. These tiny holes, no wider than the thickness of a stumpy linen thread, are drilled at a precise upward angle. When a cold palace draft rushes across the writing table, it hits the solid exterior face of the bronze base. Only a minuscule fraction of the air can find entry through the angled apertures. As this air enters the lantern, its velocity is instantly broken, transforming a violent gust into a gentle, imperceptible upward current that moves toward the base of the candle with absolute calmness. At the side of the lantern, within the upper bronze crown, a corresponding system of exhaust vents must be established. The craftsman carves a small domed chimney piece, shaped like the roof of a circular watchtower. Beneath the eaves of this miniature dome, he cuts a sequence of slender horizontal slits that allow the rising hot air to escape freely into the room. This design utilizes the natural physics of combustion. As the candle burns, it warms the air around it, causing it to rise smoothly toward the chimney, which in turn draws in a steady, minimal supply of fresh oxygen from the base apertures. The interior of the lantern becomes a closed loop of absolute equilibrium, a self-regulating microclimate completely detached from the chaotic atmospheric conditions of the wider hall. To ensure that no external drafts can force their way backward down through the top chimney, the interior of the dome is fitted with a tiny baffle plate, a curved disc of hammered bronze that acts as an aerodynamic shield. If a sudden downdraft descends from the high palace rafters, it strikes the baffle plate and is safely deflected outward through the side slits, never reaching the vulnerable tip of the flax wick below. The execution of these ventilation details requires a level of patience that tests the limits of the artisan's skill, as every hole must be meticulously cleared of metal burrs and polished until the airflow moves through the bronze channels with zero friction. King Alfred examines the completed ventilation system, testing its effectiveness by breathing heavily against the exterior of the structure while a small trial flame burns within. The flame does not flinch or tilt. It remains entirely vertical, unbothered by the external pressure, drawing its life through the hidden channels with a peaceful, silent efficiency. The architecture of the lantern is now complete, balancing containment with respiration and standing ready to receive the standardized marked beeswax taper for its ultimate, historical test against the long hours of the winter night. The long hours of preparation, calculation, and meticulous craftsmanship finally culminate on a bitter evening when a dark frost blankets the roofs of Winchester. In the absolute privacy of his personal chamber, King Alfred prepares to initiate the first true operational trial of the completed horn lantern. The room is quiet, the air cool and expectant. On the heavy oak table sits the newly engineered bronze and pearwood framework, its translucent panels of shaved ox horn gleaming softly in the dim ambient light of the room's distant hearth. Beside it lies one of the pristine 12-inch beeswax cylinders, its surface beautifully ringed with the dark oak gall markings that signify the 12 equal measures of the night. With steady, deliberate movements, the king lifts the marked candle and secures its base firmly into the central bronze socket of the lantern. The column of ivory-coloured wax stands perfectly vertical, centred precisely within the hexagonal chamber of translucent panels. Alfred takes a small iron splinter, heated to a bright orange glow in the embers of the hearth, and lowers it carefully through the open top of the framework until it touches the tip of the flax wick. A small blue-rimmed spark catches, hesitates for a second as the wax melts beneath it, and then blossoms into a brilliant golden flame that casts a warm, clear circle of light across the table. Once the flame has stabilized into a uniform cone of heat, the king takes up the domed bronze chimney piece and fits it securely over the top crown of the lantern, sealing the internal chamber completely from the immediate environment. He sits back in his oak chair, his hands resting lightly on the wood, and watches the instrument with a quiet, intense concentration. Outside, the winter wind bellows against the stone palace walls, and a sudden sharp draught rushes across the room, causing the heavy woolen drapes over the doorway to billow outward like sails. Yet, inside the miniature fortress of horn and bronze, the results are nothing short of miraculous. The flame does not flinch, it does not tilt, jump, or gutter as it had during the open-air trials. Protected within its custom sanctuary, the fire burns with an absolute, unblinking stillness, rising perfectly straight toward the bronze dome like a tiny pillar of gold. Through the milky, semi-translucent sheets of shaved horn, the light is beautifully softened, stripped of any harsh glare, and diffused evenly across the sheets of waiting vellum. The horizontal hour lines drawn by the scribes are visible with perfect clarity through the windows of the lantern, each marking standing out as a sharp, unmoving line of certainty against the slowly consuming wax fuel. As the first minutes dissolve into the night, the internal physics of the lantern function exactly as the craftsmen had engineered. The tiny angled ventilation holes at the base draw in just enough fresh oxygen to sustain the fire, while the rising heat slips silently out through the hidden slits beneath the dome. There is no turbulence, no smoke, and no rapid melting of one side over the other. The liquid amber pool at the top of the candle remains perfectly flat and level, descending with a slow, majestic predictability that matches the turning of the earth itself. Alfred watches the wax line approach the first horizontal marking with a profound sense of relief and intellectual satisfaction. The fugitive hours have finally been captured, housed within an instrument that can withstand the wildest storms of his kingdom. Inside the small enclosed sanctuary of the horn lantern, the flame achieves a state of absolute, unyielding stillness. It is a spectacle of pure equilibrium, a tiny fragment of fire, completely detached from the turbulent atmospheric changes of the wider palace hall, while the winter gales outside continue to buffet the limestone masonry of Winchester, throwing sudden, aggressive currents of cold air through every hidden fissure. The flame remains entirely vertical. It rises from the centre of the ivory cylinder like a miniature, sculpted jewel of gold and amber, its base a cool, translucent blue, its body a brilliant, unwavering yellow, and its apex a sharp, clean point that reaches steadily toward the bronze dome above. This perfect verticality is a triumph of miniature architecture. Because the ventilation apertures break the velocity of the incoming air, the internal chamber experiences a condition of complete calm, a micro-sanctuary where the air pressure is balanced to the millimeter. There is none of the frantic jumping or guttering that characterizes an open candle. The flame does not cast those restless dancing shadows that make a reader's eyes tire and wander. Instead, it spreads a constant, unfluctuating radiance through the milky panels of shaved oxhorn, casting a warm, steady pool of amber light across the king's writing desk, illuminating the vellum pages with a clarity that feels almost supernatural in its consistency. Watching this tranquil illumination, one can observe the delicate biology of the candle operating at peak efficiency. At the base of the wick, a perfectly level reservoir of liquid amber wax forms. Because the heat is distributed with absolute symmetry around the circumference of the cylinder, the outer walls of the candle decline evenly, retaining a perfect horizontal rim that never breaches or collapses. There are no cascading rivers of wasted fuel, no unsightly, ghostly ridges of hardened wax forming along the bronze holder below. Every fraction of an ounce of beeswax is consumed precisely where and when it should be, transforming solid matter into pure, steady light at an unvarying pace. For the king, this visual stillness provides a profound sense of psychological grounding. In an age defined by sudden incursions, shifting alliances, and the unpredictable erosion of old institutions, this steady, unblinking flame stands as an oasis of absolute predictability. It is a physical manifestation of the internal order he seeks to cultivate within his own mind and across the face of his realm. The flame does not care about the storm outside. It does not alter its rhythm for the darkness of the night. It simply fulfills its regulatory purpose, slicing through the gloom of the Wessex winter with a quiet, unshakable fidelity that invites the mind to settle into its own deep, focused rhythms of thought and composition. If you find comfort in these quiet, historical narratives, please consider taking a gentle moment to subscribe, like, and share this video to help keep our peaceful journeys alive. As the night moves deeper into its silent course, the true operational brilliance of King Alfred's invention becomes manifest in the slow mechanical descent of the wax. Through the translucent panels of the horn lantern, the ivory column of the candle can be seen diminishing with a majestic, unhurried predictability. The liquid amber pool at the top of the cylinder acts as a horizontal blade of heat, slicing downward millimeter by millimeter, hour by hour, completely unaffected by the drop in temperature across the stone room. It is a movement so slow that it defies the immediate perception of the eye, yet its progress is as relentless and unyielding as the rotation of the earth itself. The king watches as the level of the melting wax approaches the first inked line drawn by the royal scribes. The alignment is flawless. As the pool of fuel reaches the dark mark of oak gall ink, the line gently dissolves into the liquid amber, signaling the completion of the first hour with an absolute silent precision. There is no bell chiming, no mechanical tick to break the stillness of the chamber, only the visual transition of the wax as it surrenders its geometry to the flame. One by one, the painted Roman numerals, I3, disappear into the burning core of the lantern, their vanishing acts serving as an infallible, visual clock that registers the steady march of the night. This perfect synchronization between the physical consumption of the wax and the abstract passing of time represents a monumental victory for Alfred's administrative vision. Time is no longer a wild, formless element that slips away unnoticed in the dark. It has been tamed, calibrated, and rendered visible. Each inch of wax consumed is a physical unit of existence accounted for, a structured interval that can be deliberately allocated to the high duties of statecraft, the preservation of knowledge, or the silent elevation of the soul. The lantern does not merely illuminate the vellum pages on the table, it illuminates the structure of the king's day, providing a reliable compass to navigate the long, dark waters of the winter evening. In this newly stabilized temporal landscape, the pressure of leadership changes its character. The anxiety of the unmeasured hour, the nagging uncertainty that previously interrupted the king's thoughts, is entirely replaced by a sense of calm, unruffled momentum. Alfred can look up from his translation work, glance at the translucent windows of the lantern, and instantly read the status of the night with a single effortless look. The hours have become his companions rather than his enemies. They move beside him with a predictable, comforting rhythm, allowing his mind to sink deeper into the complex structures of classical philosophy, safe in the knowledge that his temporal anchor is holding fast against the wildest currents of the outside world. The stabilization of the nocturnal hours allows a delicate, multi-layered soundscape to emerge within the king's private room, a tapestry of small, quiet noises that defines the interior world of 9th century scholarship. With the lantern holding the darkness at bay with its steady amber radiance, the auditory landscape becomes exceptionally clear, undisturbed by the chaotic rush of an unevenly flaring candle. The primary grounding note of this quiet symphony is the faint rhythmic rustle of the flame inside its horn fortress. It is an incredibly soft, gentle sound, a minute crackle of pure forest wax transitioning from solid ivory to liquid amber, and the silent, microscopic sigh of the air moving effortlessly through the angled bronze ventilation holes at the base. Contrasting beautifully with this organic murmur is the sharp, rhythmic scratching of King Alfred's goose quill across the surface of the fine vellum sheets. The sound is deliberate and slow, a tactile manifestation of thought being captured and anchored onto the enduring page. Each stroke of the hardened pen tip, the loop of an Anglo-Saxon letter, the firm crossbar of a capital, the deliberate pause as the quill absorbs a fresh supply of dark oak gall ink from the horn well, creates a tiny, crisp friction that speaks of human intent carving its place out of the formless dark. It is the sound of literacy reclaiming the past, moving forward sentence by sentence, line by line under the unblinking gaze of the horn lantern. Far beyond these immediate, delicate micro-sounds sits the deep, resonant background of the winter night itself. The wind continues to howl across the roofs of Winchester, a wild elemental roar that emphasizes the isolation and security of the royal villa. It brushes against the heavy stone masonry with a heavy thudding pressure and whistles through the distant shingles of the great hall, yet its power is completely neutralized by the engineering of the palace walls and the miniature architecture of the lantern. The storm acts as an acoustic frame, its external violence making the deep, warm tranquility of the king's writing desk feel all the more sacred and absolute. Occasionally the silence is punctuated by the distant, muffled calling of the city night watchmen, their voices drifting through the mist to confirm that the perimeter remains secure and the kingdom sleeps in peace. These calls do not startle or disrupt the monarch. Instead, they blend seamlessly into the rhythmic pacing of his evening. Small vocal markers that confirm the world outside is moving in perfect harmony with the measured hours inside. The room exists in a state of acoustic equilibrium, where every sound, from the grandest gale to the smallest scrape of steel and skin, has its proper place, creating an atmosphere of deep, unruffled focus that coaxes the mind into its highest states of creative and spiritual devotion. As the steady candle continues its slow, unhurried journey through the night, the warmth generated within the horn lantern gives rise to a rich and comforting olfactory landscape. In the enclosed environment of the king's private chamber, the scents of natural materials expand slowly, blending into a soothing aromatic symphony that grounds the senses and deepens the tranquility of the room. The primary note in this sensory composition is the sweet, clean fragrance of the burning forest beeswax, unmarred by the acrid chemical stink of common tallow or cheap rushes. The pure wax emits a delicate aroma of wild honey, sun-drenched heather, and the faint green freshness of the summer woodlands. It is a scent that carries the memory of warmth into the heart of the winter palace, a gentle reminder of life and growth hidden beneath the frozen earth outside. Mingling with the sweetness of the honeyed wax is a more subtle, deeply comforting aroma arising from the structure of the lantern itself. As the heat of the flame gently warms the thin panels of shaved oxhorn, the organic keratin material releases a faint, earthy and resinous scent, reminiscent of clean animal barns and dried mountain moss. This warm, organic fragrance binds perfectly with the rich, deep scent of the seasoned pearwood struts and the heavy oak table upon which the instrument rests. The oak table, rubbed with cold-pressed linseed oils over many winters, exhales a slow, woody perfume that speaks of endurance, age, and unyielding strength, a tactile and olfactory anchor in the quiet room. At the center of this sensory environment, right under the king's hand, sits the unique aroma of the scribe's craft. The sheets of fine animal vellum, dried and treated with pale chalks, carry a distinct velvety scent that is entirely characteristic of medieval scholarship. When the wet, dark oak gall ink is drawn across the page by the goose quill, it releases a sharp, slightly astringent perfume, a complex smell of forest tree galls, iron salts, and rainwater that instantly evokes the serious, quiet world of the scriptorium. It is the scent of knowledge being made permanent, an intellectual fragrance that contrasts beautifully with the warm, sweet air circulating through the bronze vents of the lantern. This rich olfactory tapestry does not distract the mind, rather it acts as a subtle sensory insulation, washing away the cold, raw smell of the winter sleet that beats against the exterior limestone walls. The combination of sweet honey, polished wood, clean horn, and rich ink creates an atmosphere of complete sanctuary. For King Alfred, immersed in the deep labour of translation, these familiar, natural scents provide a profound sense of domestic peace and continuity. They define a space where the human intellect can work in absolute harmony with the organic gifts of the land, wrapped in a warm, fragrant embrace that makes the long, dark hours of the Wessex winter feel like a period of deep spiritual incubation and rest. By the steady, unblinking light of the horn lantern, King Alfred bends over his writing table, fully immersed in his most cherished intellectual endeavour. The illumination cast through the translucent amber panels falls softly across a monumental Latin manuscript, the Cura Pastoralis or Pastoral Care, written centuries earlier by Pope Gregory the Great. For Alfred, this book is not merely a collection of abstract theology. It is a practical, compassionate guide for spiritual leadership, a manual detailing how a ruler or bishop must care for the souls of his people with humility, wisdom, and constant self-reflection. The king views this text as the definitive medicine for his fractured realm, the blueprint required to rebuild the moral and intellectual foundations of Wessex from the ground up. With his goosequill held steadily in hand, Alfred begins the slow, arduous process of turning the dense, complex grammar of classical Latin into the flowing, poetic vernacular of the Anglo-Saxon tongue. The task requires an extraordinary level of mental discipline and stylistic sensitivity. He does not seek a rigid, literal word-for-word interpretation that would sound foreign and clumsy to his people. Instead, as he would later note in his famous preface, he translates whilom word be word, whilom angit of angite, sometimes word for word and sometimes meaning for meaning. Under the unwavering glow of the protected candle, his mind searches for the precise Old English terms that can accurately capture the profound psychological and spiritual insights of the Roman pontiff. The silence of the midnight chamber becomes a fertile space for this linguistic alchemy. As the lantern tracks the passing hours with quiet precision, the king traces out the beautiful rounded characters of the insular script upon the smooth vellum. He writes of the heavy burdens of authority, of the necessity for a leader to remain pure in thought and diligent in action, and of the danger of power corrupting the inner sanctuary of the mind. The steady quality of the light allows him to maintain an unbroken concentration for hours on end, freeing his intellect from the physical fatigue and visual distractions that had plagued his earlier, unshielded attempts at late-night scholarship. This act of translation is a profound exercise in cultural democratization. By rendering Pope Gregory's wisdom into the common speech of his land, Alfred is intentionally breaking down the walls of ignorance that have isolated his people for generations. He visualizes copies of this completed manuscript being distributed to every bishopric in his kingdom, accompanied by a precious estelle, a decorative book pointer as a permanent gift to encourage local literacy and study. The long winter night, once feared as a lawless void of unmeasured darkness, has been transformed by the horn lantern into a golden crucible of educational revival, where the ancient voice of Rome is given new life in the vibrant, enduring language of the West Saxons. The transformation of the evening within the Palace of Winchester marks a critical turning point for the wider preservation of knowledge across the entire realm of Wessex. In an age where the physical remnants of classical antiquity and early Christian theology are constantly threatened by the fires of warfare and the slow decay of neglect, the creation of a reliable timekeeping instrument provides a structural shield for the intellect. The horn lantern, by stabilizing the nocturnal hours, allows the royal scriptorium to function with the same systematic efficiency as the great Carolingian centres of learning across the English Channel. It converts the long dark void of the winter night into an orderly, productive extension of the daytime school, a space dedicated to the meticulous copying and safeguarding of the world's most precious texts. Scribes sit in the quiet warmth of the palace workspace, their tables illuminated by identical horn lanterns that emit a uniform, glare-free radiance. Under this gentle light, the work of copying text becomes a meditative, highly accurate discipline. The scholars are no longer forced to rush their work before the sun sinks beneath the horizon. nor are they interrupted by the flickering, smoke-producing fits of open tallow candles. They can settle into long, rhythmic sessions of transcription, matching their handwriting to the elegant, uniform standards of the royal script. The steady illumination ensures that transcription errors, the skipping of lines, the misreading of delicate abbreviations, or the smudging of wet ink, are kept to an absolute minimum, ensuring that the copies produced are flawless repositories of truth for future generations. The text passing beneath the quills of these illuminated scribes represent the bedrock of Western civilization. There are volumes of St. Augustine's profound theological treatises, the historical narratives of the Venerable Bede tracing the origin of the English people, and the timeless philosophical consolidations of Boethius reflecting on the consolations of philosophy in times of personal and political trial. To copy these works by the steady light of the lantern is an act of defiance against the encroaching darkness of ignorance. Each completed page of vellum is a stone laid in the fortress of culture, an insurance policy ensuring that the intellectual achievements of the past will survive the turbulent currents of the present. Alfred views this systematic preservation as the true calling of his Christian kingship. He understands that military victories are temporary, but a kingdom grounded in literacy, law, and historical memory possesses an internal resilience that cannot be easily destroyed by external force. The horn lantern stands at the center of this cultural fortress, a silent, glowing sentinel that measures out the precious currency of time and ensures it is spent in the service of wisdom. As the wax slowly drops within its translucent cage, the shadows of the past are driven back, and the intellectual heritage of humanity is carefully gathered, written down, and anchored into the soil of England, ready to illuminate the minds of generations yet unborn. The success of the horn lantern within the royal chambers of Winchester does not remain a guarded secret of the court. Recognizing that true order must flow from the heart of government out into the spiritual and communal centres of his people, King Alfred commands that the design be carefully replicated and distributed across the length and breadth of Wessex. Royal craftsmen journey along the old Roman roads and muddy tracks, carrying the precise measurements of the bronze moulds, the structural specifications of the pear-wood frames, and the delicate secrets of shaving ox horn to the key spiritual foundations of the land, from the fragile, newly established island monastery at Athelney to the ancient cathedral seat at Sherborne and the royal nunnery at Shaftesbury. In these holy communities, the introduction of the horn lantern brings about a quiet, profound revolution in the management of the sacred offices. For centuries, the calculation of the nocturnal prayers, matins, the deep midnight vigil followed by lauds at the first faint cracking of dawn, had been an erratic and stressful discipline. Monks and clerics known as horologers were forced to rely on the shifting positions of the winter stars through breaks in the clouds, or the highly inaccurate burning of unshielded candles that guttered and cheated the hours whenever a storm swept through the unglazed abbey windows. A cloudy winter week could throw the entire liturgical schedule into chaos, causing the community to rise too early in pitch darkness or sleep past the proper time of praise. The horn lantern changes everything, replacing anxiety with an absolute unified rhythm. Placed within the cold stone scriptoriums and the shadowy recesses of the abbey choirs, the lanterns provide a universal standard of calculation that links these far-flung outposts of learning to the exact same temporal pulse. When the bell rings for matins in the deep heart of the night, the community rises with absolute certainty, their steps guided by a steady, enclosed flame that has measured the midnight hour to the exact line of oak gall ink. The monks and holy women move through their devotions with a new sense of liturgical peace, knowing that their prayers are rising in perfect, synchronized harmony with the devotions of their sovereign in Winchester. This stabilization of the monastic hours ripples outward into the secular world, providing a framework of predictability for the farming communities that cluster around the Minster lands. The ringing of the bells for prime at the definitive moment of sunrise becomes a reliable marker for the start of the agricultural day, structuring the labour of the ploughers, the weavers, and the herdsmen. The horn lantern, born from the practical necessity of a king's late-night translations, matures into the great rhythmic metronome of the entire society, a beautifully democratic instrument that binds king, cleric, and peasant together in a shared, orderly experience of time, casting a warm, protective glow over the collective life of a rising nation. The stabilization of the nocturnal hours yields a profound administrative harvest far beyond the spiritual walls of the monasteries, reflecting directly upon the temporal governance of the West Saxon state. In the quiet, uninterrupted sanctuary of the evening sessions, King Alfred turns his highly disciplined attention to the fragmentation of Anglo-Saxon law. For generations, the legal traditions of the English peoples had existed as a scattered, often contradictory patchwork of oral customs, regional compromises, and ancient decrees left behind by past tribal kings such as Eni of Wesia and Ethelbert of Kent. To build a resilient, unified nation capable of resisting external destruction, Alfred recognizes that his people require a singular, written foundation of justice, a codified lexicon of order. Under the steady, unwavering illumination of the horn lantern, the heavy work of legal codification moves forward with a calm and deliberate momentum. The king sits with his royal witan, his council of wise men and legal scholars, reviewing old parchment rolls and listening to the testimonies of elderly law speakers who remember the unwritten customs of the shires. Without the disruptive flickering of an open candle to fracture their concentration or strain their eyesight, the assembly can debate complex matters of justice for hours into the deep night. They systematically compare the ancient codes, weighing each traditional penalty, adjusting archaic fines to reflect modern realities, and working to balance the stern demands of tribal compensation with the merciful principles of Christian scripture. The crisp, diffused amber light allows the royal scribes to record these historic deliberations with absolute graphical clarity. Line by line, the famous Doom Book, Alfred's Great Code of Laws, takes physical shape upon the smooth vellum pages. The ink flows smoothly from the goose quills, tracing out the foundational principles that will govern the social contract of Wessex. The absolute sacredness of an oath, the rigorous protection of the vulnerable, and the systematic replacement of chaotic blood feuds with an orderly system of royal courts and monetary compensations. By utilizing the structured hours of the evening, the court produces a document that is beautifully organized, free from the chaotic omissions and textual blurs that often plague rushed daytime assemblies. This meticulous codification transforms the very nature of royal authority. By committing the laws to writing during these quiet, measured nights, Alfred is consciously binding his own crown to an enduring, objective standard of justice that sits above the whims of individual rulers. The finished law code, much like the horn lantern itself, serves as an instrument of stabilization, a visible, reliable framework that protects the weak from the arbitrary pressure of the strong. As the beeswax candle burns steadily past the painted markings inside its protective cage, the chaotic, unmeasured dark of tribal custom is systematically cleared away, replaced by a permanent monument of jurisprudence that will anchor the social and political architecture of England for centuries to come. The fierce, unforgiving grip of the Wessex winter eventually begins to relent, following the ancient, unalterable choreography of the natural world. The howling gales that had spent months battering the limestone walls of Winchester gradually soften into gentle, moisture-laden breezes blowing inward from the southern coast. The deep, stubborn frost that had locked the agricultural fields in a state of suspended animation dissolve into the damp earth, allowing the first fragile shoots of spring barley and pale green clover to break through the dark soil. The days, which had been reduced to short grey intervals of light during the height of the Danish threat, begin to stretch outward with a slow, welcoming majesty, pushing the boundaries of the darkness further back with each passing week. Yet, as the external world undergoes this profound seasonal transformation, the interior of King Alfred's private chamber remains defined by its own unmoving architecture of predictability. The horn lantern does not lose its vital function with the departure of the snows. While the palace windows are now thrown open to receive the sweet, earthy fragrances of the blossoming spring orchards, the instrument remains a permanent, grounding fixture upon the heavy oak writing desk. The changing of the seasons cannot alter the king's unyielding appetite for wisdom, nor does it reduce the administrative burdens of a kingdom undergoing a systematic cultural and structural reconstruction. In fact, the arrival of spring introduces a new set of logistical rhythms that require an even greater reliance on structured time. The seasonal thawing of the rivers and roads means that royal messengers, foreign envoys and shire reeves arrive at the court in a continuous bustling stream throughout the daylight hours, filling Alfred's schedule with immediate exhausting duties of diplomacy, military defence and local governance. The daytime becomes a whirlwind of public action. It is only when the twilight falls and the busy palace corridors finally fall silent that the king can return to his true sanctuary, kindling the standardized beeswax candle within its protective keratin cage to reclaim the quiet hours needed for his personal scholarship and spiritual reflection. The lantern stands as an island of absolute constancy across the turning year. Its steady, diffused amber light continues to fall across the vellum manuscripts with the exact same soft intensity in May as it did in the bleak depths of December. By decoupling the measurement of time from the fluctuating lengths of the natural days and nights, Alfred has gifted his realm an intellectual anchor that sits entirely above the volatile whims of weather and season. The device has transitioned from a temporary winter experiment into a permanent pillar of his philosophy of life. A silent, glowing testament to the idea that true internal peace and civilizational order are not passive accidents of geography, but deliberate monuments built by the patient, disciplined application of human reason. When viewed through the long lens of history, King Alfred's horn lantern stands as a brilliant monument to the specific genius of early medieval technology, an era often unfairly dismissed as a stagnant void of intellectual darkness. The creation of this simple device reveals a profound philosophy of design that characterizes the very best of Anglo-Saxon innovation. It did not rely on the discovery of rare exotic elements or the importation of expensive foreign luxuries from the distant markets of Byzantium or the caliphates of the East. Instead, the triumph of the lantern lay in its exquisite pragmatism, the ability to take the most common, unrefined, and organic byproducts of everyday English life and elevate them into a sophisticated instrument of scientific precision through the sheer application of thoughtful engineering. The true elegance of the device rests in how beautifully it balanced disparate physical properties to solve a profound civilizational problem. The artisans of Winchester managed to harmonize the stubborn, natural resilience of the ox horn with the volatile, consuming energy of fire, using a lightweight framework of domestic pearwood and cast bronze to bind them into a permanent state of equilibrium. In doing so, they created something entirely modern for their time, a self-regulating microclimate that isolated a delicate chemical process from the chaotic movements of the macro world. It was an early, brilliant manifestation of systemic thinking, demonstrating that human reason could build a reliable shelter for truth, even in the midst of political and environmental instability. This innovative spirit reflects the deeper intellectual character of Alfred's court. The king and his circle of scholars did not view the material world and the spiritual world as separate, competing realms. Rather, they understood that the physical tools of governance, be they a well-forged sword, a cleanly surveyed defensive burr, or a perfectly calibrated timekeeper, were essential instruments required to safeguard the higher life of the mind and the soul. By bringing structure to the night, the lantern provided the physical space necessary for literacy to take root, for laws to be written down, and for the foundational texts of Western philosophy to be preserved in the native tongue of the people. It was an engineering solution built to serve a profound spiritual necessity. The legacy of this small glowing tower of horn and wood ripples far forward into the future structure of English society. The disciplined, methodical approach to materials and craftsmanship cultivated in the royal workshops of the 9th century laid the technical foundations for centuries of subsequent mechanical development. Long after the original beeswax candles had burned down to their bronze sockets and the original vellum scrolls had aged into the deep yellow of antiquity, The fundamental lesson of the lantern remained unshakable, that even the most chaotic, elusive elements of human existence, even time itself, can be masterfully claimed, measured, and dedicated to the pursuit of order, peace, and civilizational renewal through the patient, dedicated labor of the human hand and mind. With the steady march of the seasons and the passing of the years, the nocturnal hours reclaimed by the horn lantern yield a tangible, enduring monument to the revival of Wessex, a physical library of books. In the deep, silent recesses of the ancient scriptoriums, manuscripts produced under that unblinking amber glow now rest quietly upon heavy shelves of seasoned English oak. These are not mere dead sheets of parchment, they are a living, breathing landscape of collective memory. As the faint evening breeze slips through the small stone windows of the archive, it moves across the exposed edges of the vellum pages, creating a soft, dry rustle, a sound like 1,000 distant voices were whispering the ancient wisdom of the world into the calm twilight air. To walk among these shelves is to witness a civilization consciously anchoring its soul into the earth. Each volume represents weeks, often months, of meticulous manual labor carried out during those quiet nights when the outside world was surrendered to darkness and sleep. Bound in thick leather hides and secured with heavy bronze clasps to protect the contents from the damp river mists, the books stand side by side like a line of silent defensive shields. There are the historical chronicles recording the great deeds and bitter sacrifices of the Anglo-Saxon people, the foundational laws of the Doom Book that guarantee justice across the shires, and the poetic vernacular translations of classical philosophy that invite the reader to contemplate the internal nature of true happiness and divine providence. When one lifts a volume from its resting place and unhooks the metal clasps, the pages fall open with a heavy, satisfying suppleness. The dark oak gall ink, captured with absolute graphical precision under the uniform illumination of the lantern, remains as sharp and permanent as the day it was drawn by the scribe's quill. The wide, clean margins are free from the chaotic smudges or rushed omissions that characterize work done in fear of a fading light. Here, the thoughts of Pope Gregory, the theological insights of St. Augustine, and the comforting meditations of Boethius speak directly across the centuries, their complex ideas rendered perfectly clear in the common tongue of the West Saxon people. This quiet archive stands as the ultimate, indisputable justification for King Alfred's temporal obsession. The fugitive hours of the winter nights, once allowed to slip away unnoticed into the formless dark, have been masterfully crystallized into a physical fortress of culture that cannot be easily burned, forgotten, or destroyed by passing storms. The library is a sanctuary of continuity, an intellectual treasure house that ensures the children of Wessex will always know who they are, where they came from, and what values define their place under the eye of heaven. The lantern has fulfilled its grandest, most poetic purpose. It has allowed a fleeting interval of human history to craft a permanent light that will continue to illuminate the path of England for generations to come. If you have found peace and comfort in the steady light of these historical journeys, please take a brief, gentle moment to subscribe, leave a like, and share this video with others who appreciate the quiet paths of the past. As the deep hours of the night settle heavily over the capital city, the practical utility of the horn lantern extends outward from the king's private scriptorium and into the dark, labyrinthine streets of Winchester. High above on the wooden battlements and down within the damp, misty lanes of the royal burgh, the night watchmen begin their vital, silent patrols. These are the guardians of the sleeping city, men tasked with securing the heavy iron-reinforced gates, watching for the sudden flare of a careless hearth fire, and listening through the fog for any illicit movement that might threaten the internal security of the realm. In their calloused, gloved hands they carry the exact same instrument engineered for their sovereign, the portable horn lantern. Before Alfred's invention, the night watch was a treacherous and blind discipline. Torches of pine or tarred rope were volatile and dangerous, casting wild, jumping glare that ruined the guards' night vision, while acting as brilliant beacons that announced their positions to any hidden thief or assassin long before they arrived. Open lanterns fitted with cheap linen or oiled parchment were easily snuffed out by a sudden gust of wind coming off the River Itchen, leaving a sentry completely stranded in the pitch-black void of the midnight lanes. The new horn lantern, however, provides these men with a robust, unshakable ally against the hazards of the dark. Moving in pairs through the narrow stone alleyways, the watchmen hold the lanterns low to the ground. The shaved ox horn panels completely encapsulate the internal candle, ensuring that even when a freezing drizzle sweeps across the downs or a sudden blast of wind rushes down the timber eaves, the flame inside remains entirely unbothered, burning with a quiet, stubborn efficiency. The milky translucency of the keratin sheets performs an essential tactical function. It strips away the harsh, blinding pinpoint of a raw flame, transforming the light into a soft, wide-angled amber glow that perfectly illuminates the treacherous mud-slick cobbles without throwing long, revealing shadows down the main thoroughfares. The rhythmic bobbing of these warm golden spheres through the rolling midnight fog brings a profound sense of psychological comfort to the sleeping citizens within their timber-framed homes. To a weaver or a blacksmith waking momentarily in the dark, the faint, familiar amber light, filtering through the cracks of their wooden shutters, is a visible sign of royal stewardship, a silent confirmation that while they rest, the king's order is actively patrolling the perimeter. The lantern has successfully stepped across the threshold of the scholar's study to become a practical shield for the community, a small, glowing beacon of civil peace that holds the chaotic terrors of the night at bay and guarantees the morning will find the city secure, unbroken, and at rest. In the deep, profound stillness that precedes the first cracking of the morning light, King Alfred sits back from his desk, his eyes resting upon the steady, unblinking flame within the horn lantern. The long night of reading, writing, and administrative calculation has passed without a single moment of internal chaos or visual fatigue. In this state of clear, unruffled contemplation, the king's mind moves beyond the immediate mechanics of wood, bronze, and wax, ascending to the higher philosophical architecture that underpins his entire life's work. For Alfred, the reclamation of time from the formless dark is not merely an act of clever governance or scientific curiosity. It is a profound form of spiritual stewardship, a deliberate effort to align human existence with the perfect, unchangeable order of the divine. According to the classical philosophy the king has so painstakingly translated, time is not a random, hostile river sweeping humanity toward oblivion. It is a created element, a beautiful and structured gift bestowed by a creator whose own existence sits entirely outside the boundaries of past, present, and future. To allow time to slip away unmeasured, wasted in ignorance, or fractured by internal chaos, is to reject this divine gift and surrender to the formless void. By capturing the fugitive hours inside a fortress of horn and wood, the king believes he is performing a sacred duty, rescuing a fragment of creation from the forces of entropy and dedicating it to the pursuit of truth, justice, and spiritual elevation. This philosophy of a measured life transforms the very experience of mortality for the Christian monarch. In an age where life is frequently short, violent, and unpredictably disrupted by external invasions, the ability to consciously structure one's daily intervals brings a profound sense of internal autonomy and peace. A day or a night that is carefully measured and purposefully spent, divided evenly between the defense of the realm, the execution of justice, and the silent cultivation of the soul, becomes an island of absolute meaning. It allows a ruler to stand firm against the volatile currents of fortune, safe in the knowledge that while his physical body may wear away across the years, the intellectual and spiritual monuments he builds within those structured hours will endure. Alfred looks down at his hands, calloused from both the iron hilt of the sword and the smooth shaft of the goose quill, and feels a deep, grounding satisfaction. The lantern on his desk has done far more than illuminate the Latin sentences of Pope Gregory or the legal clauses of the Doom Book. It has provided a physical framework for a disciplined mind to seek its own internal salvation. By bringing order to the night, the king has demonstrated that even within the fragile, imperfect boundaries of a mortal kingdom, humanity can participate in the majestic, unvarying rhythm of heaven, transforming the passing hours from a terrifying march toward death into a beautiful, steady ascent toward light and eternal peace. High above the timber roofs and stone ramparts of Winchester, the great, vaulting canopy of the English sky unfolds in a spectacle of silent, celestial majesty. Across the deep indigo expanse of the midnight heaven, the ancient constellations trace their slow, unalterable paths, following a geometric choreography that has remained unchanged since the dawn of creation. The evening star, a brilliant jewel of cold silver light, hangs suspended over the western downs, leading the march of the lesser stars as they wheel slowly around the unmoving point of the northern sky. It is a vast cosmic clockwork, a macrocosm of perfect uninterrupted order that moves with an absolute stillness, entirely detached from the mortal anxieties and violent transformations of the earth below. When one looks down from this breathless stellar perspective toward the dark outline of the royal palace, a beautiful microscopic reflection of this heavenly order becomes visible. In the high narrow window of the king's private chamber, a solitary point of light glows with a warm, steady constancy. It is the horn lantern emitting its soft, diffused amber radiance into the cool night air. From a distance, the lantern appears like a fallen star captured within the limestone walls of the city, a tiny terrestrial counterpart to the celestial bodies that illuminate the firmament. The two lights, though vastly different in scale and material, exist in a state of perfect philosophical harmony. Inside the lantern, the descent of the wax line past each dark mark of oak gall ink occurs in absolute synchronization with the majestic turning of the heavens above. As the great constellation of the plough tilts its handle toward the horizon, signaling the transition from midnight to the deeper hours of the early morning, the candle inside its protective keratin cage shrinks by a corresponding measure. There is no friction between the micro-time of the king's study and the macro-time of the universe. The miniature architecture engineered by the Winchester artisans has successfully bridged the gap between human experience and cosmic law, allowing a mortal king to live in direct rhythm with the turning of the spheres. This visual alignment between the earth and the sky provides a profound sense of reassurance to the watchers of the night, to the sentry on the wall or the scholar looking out into the dark. The dual spectacle of the turning stars above and the unblinking lantern below speaks of a world that is held firmly within a grander, protective embrace. The darkness is not an absolute, chaotic master. It is merely a canvas across which the laws of light and geometry are beautifully drawn. As the night moves toward its eventual conclusion, the steady amber glow in the palace window remains an unshakable anchor, a small, courageous monument of human reason proving that even here, amidst the mud and stone of Wessex, life can be lived in perfect, unyielding harmony with the eternal order of the cosmos. Deep within the industrial quarters of Winchester, far from the elevated philosophical atmosphere of the royal scriptorium, the master smiths and horn carvers sleep the deep, untroubled sleep of exhaustion. Their workshops are silent now. The great charcoal hearths have cooled to pale grey ash, the iron chisels rest cleanly in their wooden racks, and the heavy bronze casting frames stand empty along the stone benches. Yet the physical legacy of their winter labour remains wide awake, scattered across the palaces, chapels and fortifications of the realm. In the quiet hours of the early morning, the invisible fruit of their calloused hands is actively measuring out the safety and intellect of an entire nation. Had a stranger walked through those workshops during the frantic months of development, they might have seen only the mundane, dirty realities of early medieval manufacturing. They would have encountered the choking, pungent steam of boiling hooves, the harsh, metallic rasp of files grinding down rough bronze edges, and the repetitive, bone-tiring scrape of horn shaves peeling away layers of organic keratin. These nameless artisans did not speak in the elegant Latin prose of the court scholars, nor did they possess the theoretical vocabulary to describe the aerodynamic principles of combustion and fluid dynamics. They worked entirely through the intuitive, inherited wisdom of the senses, trusting the weight of a hammer, the smell of a warming horn panel, and the unique, tactile friction of a razor-sharp blade against the heartwood of a pear tree. Yet this meticulous, unhurried attention to physical detail represents the true backbone of Alfred's civilizational reconstruction. The absolute stability that the king enjoys at his writing desk is a direct consequence of an artisan's patient refusal to allow a single millimeter of error into the channel of a wooden strut. The pristine, unblinking quality of the light is a monument to the craftsman who spent an extra hour polishing a sheet of oxhorn with dried horsetail reeds until it reached a uniform, translucent perfection. These men took the chaotic, raw materials of the English countryside and, through the sheer application of manual discipline, elevated them into instruments of mathematical precision. This is the quiet, enduring satisfaction of the medieval maker, knowing that an object built with absolute integrity creates an immediate space for order to flourish in the wider world. The smith did not just cast a bronze base, he cast a foundation for legal stability. The carpenter did not just join 6 wooden pillars, he joined a framework within which the history of the English people could be safely committed to parchment. As the early morning mist rolls off the downs and wraps around the timber eaves of the city, the silent lanterns continue to burn steadily across Winchester, each one a glowing, functional signature of the nameless craftsman whose quiet mastery over matter brought permanent light and peace to a rising kingdom. The ultimate significance of the horn lantern extends far beyond the physical creation of books or the orderly scheduling of monastic prayers. It lies in its quiet contribution to the preservation of peace itself. In an era when greatness is almost exclusively measured by the bloody metrics of the battlefield, the number of enemy shields shattered, the richness of captured plunder, or the expansion of territorial boundaries through brute force, King Alfred's intellectual infrastructure introduces a completely different philosophy of national security. The king understands a profound strategic truth that many of his contemporary rulers ignore, that a kingdom built solely upon military might is a fragile house of cards, and that true, enduring resilience must be cultivated from within through the systematic elevation of cultural, educational, and spiritual order. By utilizing the structured, measured evenings provided by the lantern, the court of Winchester is able to build an internal fortress of administrative excellence that makes Wessex an incredibly difficult target for external aggression. A society that documents its laws, accurately audits its resources, and maintains a unified, predictable communication network across its shires possesses an inherent structural strength that cannot be easily broken by sudden Viking incursions. The lantern has helped transform a loose, vulnerable collection of fractured territories into a highly organized, self-aware commonwealth. This internal cohesion acts as a powerful, silent deterrent. The Danish warlords, accustomed to exploiting the chaotic divisions of weak kingdoms, increasingly find themselves confronting a disciplined, sophisticated state machine that responds to pressure with an unruffled mechanical efficiency. Furthermore, this systematic devotion to literacy and legal justice provides Alfred with the intellectual leverage necessary to negotiate lasting diplomatic settlements without resorting to endless, exhausting warfare. Peace is no longer just a temporary, anxious pause between battles. It is a legally codified reality written down in clear, bilingual treaties that are binding upon the honor of both Christian and pagan leaders. When the king sits at the negotiating table with Danish commanders like Guthrum, he does not merely bring the threat of the sword. He brings an authoritative written framework of boundary lines, trade regulations, and mutual oaths that have been meticulously worked out during those long illuminated nights in his private study. The horn lantern, therefore, stands as a beautiful paradoxical instrument of non-violent resistance. It is a tool that conquers chaos, not by destroying the enemy, but by strengthening the soul of the home kingdom. Each hour spent by the king and his scholars translating classical philosophy, refining the legal codes, or teaching the children of the nobility to read is an active investment in the deep, cultural root system of the English people. They are building a society that knows exactly what it is fighting to protect, a civilization grounded in reason, law, and historical memory. As the steady amber glow continues to shine out through the palace window into the early morning mist, it serves as a silent, unshakable testament to the idea that the quiet cultivation of wisdom is the grandest, most courageous defense a nation can ever mount against the darkness of the world. The small localized beacon of light that began as a personal experiment in a winter-locked chamber in Winchester radiates far beyond the geographical and temporal borders of 9th century Wessex. When viewed across the vast panoramic expanse of historical time, King Alfred's humble horn lantern serves as a profound reflective bridge, casting an undying glow that shatters the persistent myth of the Dark Ages. It stands as an enduring symbol of a moment when the intellectual flame of Western civilization did not simply gutter out under the pressure of barbarian invasions, but was carefully sheltered, nourished, and allowed to grow strong within a tiny self-regulating sanctuary of English engineering and scholarship. By providing the physical framework necessary to master the night, this simple device allowed Alfred and his descendants to lay the deep, unshakable intellectual foundations for a fully unified England. The books transcribed under its soft, diffused amber light, the legal codes, the historical chronicles, and the classic vernacular translations became the common currency of a developing national identity. Long after the immediate threat of the Danish longships had faded into the background of memory, the shared language, the uniform legal system, and the disciplined administrative institutions born during those illuminated evenings continued to bind the separate shires of the island into a singular, cohesive commonwealth that would alter the course of the world. The design of the lantern itself became a permanent fixture of European material culture, a timeless testament to the practical genius of Anglo-Saxon innovation. For nearly 1,000 years following Alfred's reign, the horn lantern remained the definitive universal tool utilized by watchmen, scholars, travelers, and monks across the Western world to navigate the dangers of the dark. From the shadowy corridors of high medieval universities to the foggy, cobblestone streets of Elizabethan London, the basic architecture of the device, the protective, light-softening panels of shaved keratin held within a durable framework, remained virtually unchanged, a quiet, ubiquitous legacy of the 9th century workshops of Winchester. Ultimately, the true significance of the lantern lies in its profound demonstration of human agency over historical circumstance. It reminds us that even when the wider world appears to be descending into a state of irrecoverable chaos, fragmentation, and violence, the light of reason and the pursuit of wisdom do not have to be passively surrendered to the dark. They can be actively protected, measured, and institutionalized through the patient, disciplined application of human craftsmanship and intellect. The steady glow of that long ago candle continues to shine through the centuries, an unextinguished beacon of historical timelessness that reminds every subsequent generation that the path to civilizational renewal is always built line by line, hour by hour, in the quiet sanctuary of an unyielding purpose. The long, productive journey of the night enters its final, most meditative phase as the physical universe outside begins to shift its weight toward the dawn. Inside the king's private room, the narrative pace slows down significantly, matching the quiet, near-static rhythm of a space that has been perfectly insulated from the outside world for hours on end. The focus returns entirely to the miniature sanctuary resting upon the oak table, where the ivory column of the beeswax candle has now shrunk to a small glowing remnant of its former self. The liquid reservoir of amber fuel sits deep within the protective cylinder of the horn panels, its surface a perfect level mirror that reflects the tiny golden jewel of the flame above. The level of the melting wax is now approaching the very last horizontal marking of dark oak gall ink painted by the royal scribes. It is a moment of profound visual finality. The distance between the burning edge of the wick and the base of the bronze holder has narrowed to a fraction of an inch, a tiny, diminishing horizon that represents the completion of the night's allocated labour. There is no sense of rush or anxiety in this slow descent. The candle moves toward its conclusion with the same unhurried, majestic predictability that has characterized its entire progress across the dark hours. Every particle of the filtered forest wax is being consumed precisely as it was engineered to be, leaving no waste, no smoke, and no uneven ridges along the inner walls of the lantern. The soft diffused amber light cast through the shaved oxhorn sheets takes on an even warmer, more intimate quality as the flame sinks lower into the bronze socket. The long, protective shadows that have spent the night resting in the distant corners of the limestone room expand slowly, gently folding around the heavy bookshelves and the draped tapestries, drawing the perimeter of the room into a quiet, sleepy embrace. The king watches this gradual softening of his immediate world with a deep physical sense of completion. The vellum pages of his translation work are filled with sharp, beautiful lines of insular script, a permanent harvest of wisdom reaped from the wilderness of the dark. This final, slow approach to the last mark of the candle marks the natural closing of a great administrative loop. The time that had threatened to slip away as a chaotic, formless enemy at twilight has been masterfully meted out, accounted for, and transformed into a permanent monument of cultural and spiritual preservation. There is nothing left to calculate, no further legal clause to refine, no remaining Latin sentence to decipher. The internal rhythm of the chamber has achieved a state of absolute, tranquil balance, where the closing of the book, the exhaustion of the fuel, and the eventual arrival of the morning exist in perfect synchronized harmony, a quiet, beautiful testament to a life lived in complete accordance with order and purpose. With the approach of the final mark upon the diminishing taper, a deep, heavy quietude settles over the entire royal palace of Winchester, spreading outward like a soft cloak across the valleys of Wessex. The narrative rhythm transitions into a deeply soothing, near-silent cadence, echoing the utter stillness that has claimed the kingdom in these final fragile hours before the dawn. The sharp scratching of King Alfred's goose quill has long since ceased, its work finished and its tip resting quietly in the dry horn inkwell. The grand elemental storms that had spent the night howling across the limestone ramparts have finally exhausted their fury, softening into a faint, distant whisper that gently brushes against the lead-weighted window panes. This pervasive silence is accompanied by a profound physical surrender to rest across every tier of the castle's life. Down within the great communal halls, the royal guards and attendants have drifted into deep, untroubled slumber, their heavy woolen cloaks drawn tightly against the fading chill of the floorstones. In the distant scriptoriums and abbey cells, the scholars, monks, and holy women have closed their heavy oak book holders, letting their heads rest upon simple straw pallets as their minds release the complex structures of theology and law. The entire realm exists in a state of blessed, unruffled security, held fast within the protective framework of order and defense that their sovereign has so meticulously maintained throughout the winter season. Inside the private chamber, the immediate environment undergoes a beautiful softening dissolution. The soothing scents of wild honey, warm pearwood, and aged vellum seem to hang motionless in the still, warm air, creating an atmosphere of total sanctuary that gently coaxes the senses toward repose. King Alfred sits back into the deep recess of his high-backed wooden chair, his hands resting loose and unmoving upon the finished sheets of translation. The heavy, persistent weight of leadership, the constant nagging anxiety of the unmeasured hour and the fragmented kingdom has completely vanished from his brow, replaced by an overwhelming, tranquil sense of inner peace and completion. The world has been stabilized, the borders are secure, the laws are written down, and the morning will find a nation fully prepared to meet its destiny with clarity and strength. As the final microscopic remnants of the beeswax candle melt into the smooth bronze socket of the lantern, the king's eyelids grow heavy under the soft dimming amber radiance. He lets his breath fall into a slow rhythmic alignment with the quiet breathing of the room, surrendering his consciousness to the gentle welcoming embrace of sleep, safe in the profound knowledge that his temporal anchor has held true and his people rest in perfect unbroken peace under the watchful eyes of heaven. Inside the protective fortress of the horn lantern, the final minuscule fraction of the standardized beeswax candle gently reaches its absolute end. The glowing wick, having faithfully traced the passing of the 12th and final hour, sinks slowly into the shallow pool of liquid amber at the very base of the bronze socket. There is no sudden gasp of smoke, no sharp, erratic sputter, and no dramatic flare of light to break the deep sacred tranquility of the room. Instead, the small golden flame dissolves with an extraordinary, soft majesty into its own melted warmth, leaving behind a lingering, beautiful glow that stays suspended in the quiet dark for one final, timeless moment before slipping peacefully away. As the physical light vanishes, it reveals that the window pane is no longer framed by the pitch-black void of the winter night. A soft pale blue light, the first clean cold breath of the new dawn, is already creeping over the crest of the eastern downs, spilling quietly through the open shutters to illuminate the room in a gentle, natural clarity. The heavy oak writing table, the stacks of fine animal vellum, the closed inkwell and the beautiful, completed manuscripts of the Doom Book and the Cura Pastoralis sit calmly under this fresh morning air. They stand as quiet, monumental witnesses to what has been achieved in the dark, enduring achievements of law, language, and culture that have been permanently rescued from the chaotic currents of time. A profound, lingering sense of tranquility and rest fills the silent chamber, stretching out across the sleeping streets of Winchester and into the furthest corners of the unified realm. The small practical invention of wood, metal, and shaved ox horn has fulfilled its grandest civilizational purpose. By providing a reliable anchor for the dark, it has allowed a mortal king to conquer the formless void of the night, laying down the structural and intellectual foundations that will guide his people for centuries to come. The long winter night is over, the kingdom is secure, and the future lies open, clear, and bright under the eye of a new day. The channel History Under Moonlight is a storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of relaxation and peaceful sleep. All stories presented on this channel are global historical tales, gently curated and narrated based on themes such as ancient mysteries, forgotten chronicles, and the calm, reflective moments of our shared past through time.